Myst, Might, Mayhem? Story. The Master did not discuss about prodigies, feats of strength, disorderly conduct, or the supernatural. Note, prequel to Nanomachine, Chapter 0, Prologue. The Master did not discuss about prodigies, feats of strength, disorderly conduct, or the supernatural. Whoosh, the scorch-like heat. Before my eyes, a building was ablaze in flames. Chaos reigned both inside and outside the structure. Arg? Help me! People engulfed in fire, writhing in the searing flames. In my hand, as I gazed upon them, was a sickle drenched in something wet. The sight of a sickle meant for harvesting herbs soaked in blood was utterly gruesome. PL, please help. Those who escaped from the flame-engulfed building rolled on the ground frantically to extinguish the fire on their bodies. But the flames that already covered them from head to toe weren't easily quenched. They died in agony as their flesh burned. Despite the horrific scene, I felt not a shred of guilt. No, I don't even know what guilt is. Cough, cough, promise me. What do you mean? Never reveal your true nature, grandfather. Did this old man teach you to be like that? I understand. The promise I made to my grandfather before he passed away keeps echoing in my head. However, that promise was not kept. No, it would be more accurate to say it was a promise that couldn't be kept. I'm sorry, grandfather. I can't stop this until I find that bastard who made you suffer so terribly. Even if the end result is the reality you feared, grandfather. The more blood I see, the harder it becomes to control myself. What expression am I making right now? I could feel the corners of my mouth twitching even as I witnessed this horrific scene of burning flesh and blood. This emotion was unmistakably pleasure. True nature, could evil truly be my true nature? At least it feels more liberating than the version of myself grandfather taught me to be. Like I've been freed from shackles. Phew! It doesn't matter. Thanks to the scent of blood, I'm getting closer to finding clues about that bastard. In high spirits. Now I just need to finish off the remaining survivors before leaving. I gripped the sickle and took steps toward the few people who were still alive. 1 step, 2 steps as I walked, they stared at me with eyes filled with terror. That fear wasn't unpleasant. If anything, it further tickled my murderous intent. Step. As I took another step, someone who had been frightened shouted at me. The sickle-slaying demon. The sickle-slaying demon. It's a nickname I gained while tracking that bastard's traces. Whenever I suspected someone was even slightly connected to him, I killed them all, and before I knew it, people started calling me the sickle-slaying demon. They say it's because of the sickle marks left on the corpses. I seem to have inadvertently gained notoriety, in just 1 month at that. It's probably because I messed with slightly larger villages this time, unlike the remote mountain villages before. Thanks to that, I learned a good lesson. I should burn everything, so as not to unnecessarily leave traces on the corpses. No. Maybe it would be better not to use the sickle at all. I don't know. I'll worry about it later. For now, let's just kill them all and see. Swish, I raised the sickle toward the survivor crawling on the ground. Eek! The survivor curled up, face pale with fright. Regardless, I swung the sickle, thud. Something struck my abdomen with tremendous force, sending my body flying backward. Even after rolling on the ground several times, the force did not dissipate. I barely stopped after tumbling for a while, and the strange force churning my insides made me vomit violently. Bleg! Cheers rang out as I was retching. It seemed to be the survivors' cries, no longer paralyzed by fear. Although my insides still felt queasy and strength hadn't fully returned to my body, I struggled to lift my head. What the? As I wondered, I saw someone raising their hand. That person was responding to the people's cheers as if they were some kind of hero. Then they soon shouted in a haughty voice. Indeed, the sickle-slaying demon, to think you withstood my 3-star might. 3-star might. What the hell is he blabbering about? The only thing I could understand from what this person said was the title sickle-slaying demon. Cough, cough. I suppressed the urge to vomit. I don't know who this person is, but one thing is certain: this person is dangerous. I tried to forcibly get up, but my feet and legs wouldn't cooperate. Your evil deeds end here, sickle-slaying demon. That person slowly walked toward me. Danger. I gritted my teeth. If I can't move, my life might be in jeopardy. Whoosh. What? The man seemed to be walking slowly, but suddenly he was standing right in front of me. Fast, how can a person move this quickly? It was absurd. Hum. The middle-aged man let out a groan. I hadn't noticed from a distance, but he had a long scar above his left eyebrow. In his right hand was a blackened sword, as if it had been burned, and its sharpness was far from ordinary. I have to escape. All my senses were screaming warnings. No matter how much I struggled, I was no match for this person. Then, the middle-aged man spoke in a low voice, his face markedly colder than before. I wondered who was snooping around, but to think it was a teenage brat who hasn't even been weaned. He feels like a completely different person. But more than that, something else caught my attention. Snooping around, then this person is Grab. Gah! Before I could even finish my thought, the man grabbed my neck. Even though I'm 17, my body is not lacking compared to the average adult male's height. Yet he lifted me up as if I weighed nothing. I looked at his wrist and forearm, but there was no change in his muscles. How did he lift me up like a feather? As I wondered, the man furrowed his brow. You haven't learned martial arts. Martial arts? You don't even know what martial arts are. Ha! The man seemed astonished. Just what are these martial arts that he's reacting this way? Interesting. A kid who hasn't even learned martial arts survived a strike from me. Cough, cough, what are you even saying? Shunk. Irk. My abdomen burns. His black blade had pierced my abdomen before I knew it. The man grinned savagely and spoke in a murderous voice. It'd be better to kill you now to avoid future troubles. Squelch, stab, ack. Right after pulling out the sword embedded in my abdomen, the bastard stabbed my left chest. As the sword penetrated my chest, blood gushed from my throat along with immense pain. You should have just lived quietly. Why go around causing trouble and hastening your own demise? Ha, ha. As I gasped for breath, the bastard tossed me to the ground. Then he turned around, raising his black sword, and shouted, "The sickle-slaying demon's evil deeds end here. Everyone rest assured." He acted like a righteous hero again. The survivors, unaware of the bastard's true colors, let out joyful cheers. The wound in my chest was agonizing, but his hypocritical behavior infuriated me. I finally found someone who might be my nemesis, only to be defeated so pathetically. I was no match for him from the start. Grandfather, my vision gradually blurred. Am I going to grandfather's side without even getting revenge? He's going to scold me to no end for breaking our promise from Ainz, Book 7, Chapter 21. The master did not discuss about prodigies, feats of strength, disorderly conduct, or the supernatural. Confucius' sole object of concern was self-cultivation. He did not waste time on irrelevant frivolities. As Wang Bai explains, prodigies refers to strange or unusual events. Feats of strength refer to things like Ao's ability to handle warships or Wu Huo being able to lift 1,000 pounds. Disorderly conduct refers to a minister killing his lord, or a son killing his father. And the supernatural refers to the service of the ghosts and spirits. These things either have nothing contribute to one's moral education, or are simply things the master found distasteful to talk about. Resources: Confucius Ainz, with selections from traditional commentaries translated by Edward Slingerland, Hackett Publishing Limited, Chapter 1. Opportunity 1. Zhongliang County. A large crowd gathered in the marketplace. The middle-aged woman selling snacks from a stall, the man precariously carrying a water jug on his back, the children running around with friends, and various other passers-by all directed their gazes in one direction. A long procession was passing through the center of the village street. Creak. Creak. The sound of thick wooden bars on the carriage wheels could be heard. Inside the wooden cages, visible between the guards escorting the procession, were prisoners with their hands and feet bound. Look at that. Ugh, they're completely covered in blood. Their faces were haggard and full of wounds, as if they had endured severe hardships. Their white prisoners' garments were stained red. Perhaps because of this, the atmosphere in the village as they watched the procession was extremely grim. The procession continued for a while. Then someone picked up a stone from the ground and threw it inside the wooden cage. "You cockroach-like bastards!" Thud. Erg! The prisoner, with his limbs tied, couldn't avoid the stone and was hit. Seeing the prisoner's pained expression, some of the onlookers started grabbing whatever they could and throwing it. Thud, 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 the prisoners inside the wooden cages had no choice but to endure being hit. Wretched things. Damn scoundrels. Take this and die. None of the guards escorting them stopped this. Rather, they just watched with mocking laughter. This was the purpose of publicly transporting prisoners from the start, to announce their crimes to the world. A middle-aged man was observing them from a second-floor window of an inn. Sitting properly and sipping tea, the county's government official sitting across from him asked in confusion, "Why do you react so?" They were criminals. The man before his eyes was not one to easily feel sympathy for prisoners. At this, the middle-aged man glanced at a certain cage. Unlike the other prisoners, there was one locked up alone. It was a prisoner whose chest and abdomen were stained red. "He's young." The prisoner was sitting upright with disheveled hair. Although half his face was obscured by the unkempt hair, he was clearly a boy at a glance. At most, he seemed to be 16 or 17 years old. The same age as the young master. Seeing that young prisoner suddenly reminded him of the young master he served. But then he shook his head. What did age have to do with committing crimes? The government official, who had been observing him, spoke with a solemn expression. "It's difficult to say until the execution, but despite his appearance, he seems to have committed the most serious crime among them." Puzzled by those words, the middle-aged man asked, "What do you mean by that? The brat you called young is the most vicious of the prisoners transported this time." "The most vicious?" The middle-aged man couldn't hide his bewilderment. What was so vicious about that young prisoner? Did he harm people? The worst crime in the eyes of the government was treason, called the crime of high treason. However, those who committed high treason were transported with their crimes publicly announced, so that couldn't be it. Then there was only one crime that could be considered the most vicious. Murder. "That's right." At the government official's answer, the middle-aged man let out a soft sigh. For ordinary civilians, murder was a grave crime, but for martial artists like himself, killing and being killed was not uncommon. The government official clicked his tongue as he watched him. Tusk. As expected of a martial artist, this doesn't seem to faze you much. In this world, people die left and right. That may be so, but if you knew that kid's identity? Thud. Before the government official could finish speaking, a stone flew and struck the head of the boy inside the wooden cage. The surroundings became noisy. Blood was flowing from the boy's head. However, unlike the other prisoners, the boy showed no signs of movement or groans of pain. That young boy is quite a unique one. Does he not feel pain? His head is like that, yet how? This sight caught the middle-aged man's attention as well. That kid, for those who have trained in internal energy or received training, enduring pain to some extent is possible. However, that boy was an ordinary civilian. Yet, despite being hit directly on the head by a stone hard enough to split it open, he didn't let out a single groan. Furthermore, the lack of any movement was truly impressive. Swish. As the flowing blood soaked his head, the boy tilted his head upward as if it was bothersome. This revealed his face that had been obscured by his hair. Instantly, exclamations of surprise escaped the nearby onlookers' mouths. The government official was the same. Oh my. Even though his face was drenched in blood, his handsomeness couldn't be hidden. With tall and well-proportioned features and delicate lines, his face possessed a unique charm. Peculiarly, his impression seemed gentle, even kind. With a face like that, how could he do such things? The government official was puzzled. The middle-aged man was staring at the young prisoner with an extremely shocked expression. Why are you reacting like that?" At that question, the middle-aged man flinched and shook his head. "It's nothing." Nothing. He pretended it was nothing, but just a moment ago he clearly had a face as if he had received a shock. As the official tried to ask again why he reacted that way, the middle-aged man stood up from his seat. And he said, "The tea was delicious. It seems I have an urgent matter to attend to." "Oh my, we finally met after so long. I'm in a hurry. Next time we meet, I'll treat you lavishly at Moon Fragrance Tower 1. Moon Fragrance Tower, ahem. At his words, the corners of the government official's mouth twitched. What man wouldn't be pleased to be treated at the most luxurious courtesan house in the district? Near the end of the Chu Hour 2 at dawn, in the underground level of the Xinjiang County Government Office's prison building, most of the imprisoned criminals were asleep, and even the guards watching over the prison were nodding off while leaning against the walls. Amidst them, there was only one person who wasn't asleep. It was the young prisoner with disheveled hair. The boy locked in the prison was staring blankly at the wall. It had been 4 days since he woke up after being thought dead. Many things had happened during that time. While it was fortunate that he miraculously survived, when he awoke, he was imprisoned as a criminal. Moreover, the date of his public execution had already been set. The punishment was quartering. It was a punishment where the arms and legs were each tied to different carts and torn apart, killing the person. A fitting punishment, I suppose. He had brutally killed so many people that he was called the sickle-slaying demon. Regardless of the method, it would be difficult to avoid the death penalty. Nevertheless, there was no hint of regret or any anxious emotions in the boy's eyes. Rather, the boy's mind was occupied with something else. What? Martial arts? Hey, kid, have you perhaps ever met a martial artist? That's what one of the prisoners transported with him had said. Thanks to that, the boy was able to solve the question he had been harboring. Martial artist, he had occasionally heard of them when he accompanied his grandfather to the village. They said martial artists could run at the speed of a horse and surpass the strength of ordinary people by cultivating something called Kai. What he had only heard through rumors turned out to be true. That man had driven him to the brink of death in the blink of an eye. The result would be the same even if we met again. No matter how much he thought about it without sleeping, he couldn't come up with a way to kill that man. Even if he attempted a surprise attack or set a trap, would it work? To begin with, that was a monster in human form. Are martial artists originally that strong? If that was the case, avenging his grandfather might become a distant dream. No matter how much he struggled, if it was an existence he couldn't kill. As he was deep in thought, the boy suddenly realized something. Martial arts. There was only one difference between that man and himself. The difference between having learned martial arts and not having learned them led to that result. Then, the conclusion might be simple. I need martial arts. If the conditions were the same, the outcome could be different. It seemed he had finally found an answer. However, there was a problem. No, 2 problems. The first was that he needed to get out of here. If he remained still like this, he would be subjected to quartering and die with his limbs torn apart. The second was how he could learn martial arts. Who do I learn from? He needed to find someone to teach him martial arts, but he had no idea how to find such people. Moreover, even if he somehow escaped from here, he was a prisoner. If he broke out of prison, a warrant would undoubtedly be issued. Then, who would be willing to teach martial arts to a criminal like him? A complicated situation. His mind became chaotic again. He newly realized that his grandfather's promise had been right. No matter how much it was for the sake of revenge, he shouldn't have easily revealed his hidden nature. It's like I dug my own grave. Even if he realized it now, it was too late. The consequences had already unfolded. The one fortunate thing was that even though he was alive, that man didn't seem to know yet. No, perhaps he knew but left him alone since he was in a situation where he would be executed. As he was pondering over this, swish, a faint sound came from somewhere. The boy turned his body. Sensing something strange, the boy held his breath and focused on the sounds coming from his surroundings. What is it? At the moment he was curious, something caught the boy's eye. A faint haze-like substance was spreading from below the right side of the prison cell he was confined in. The boy's eyes narrowed. Is there a fire? He wondered if there was a fire in the prison building. However, that suspicion soon disappeared. For a fire, there was no particular commotion, and it was too quiet. But then, thud, thud, the sounds of something falling could be heard. Judging from the direction of the sounds, it seemed to be where the guards were stationed. The haze that had been spreading was now seeping into the boy's prison cell. A faint scent tickled his nose, and a few medicinal herbs came to mind. Lizard's tail 3, female ginseng 4, Gromwell root 5, scented solemn and seal 6. He had been gathering and cultivating medicinal herbs for nearly 10 years while following his grandfather. With a terrifyingly keen sense of smell, the boy instantly recognized the herbs mixed in the haze-like faint smoke. Sleeping incense, Cromwell roots, and scented solemn and seal were herbs that induced sleep. With this combination, those who inhaled this smoke would not wake up for about 2 hours. But the boy was different. The mixture is crude. Unless it was his grandfather's mixture, he wouldn't fall asleep from this level of sleeping incense, because he had steadily built up resistance to various herbs since childhood. The boy judged that something was happening. On a deep night when everyone was asleep, sleeping incense had spread inside the government office's prison. The boy leaned against the wall and focused on the sounds. Swish, swish. The sound of someone moving while suppressing their presence could be heard. It was a level of sound that ordinary people would have difficulty noticing, but it faintly reached the boy's ears. Who is it? They had spread sleeping incense and entered. It meant they had come in with some purpose. Very quiet footsteps were moving back and forth in various parts of the prison. What are they trying to do? He couldn't tell who had infiltrated and for what purpose. Then the footsteps headed towards his cell. The boy lowered his head and deliberately pretended to be asleep. Swish, swish. The footsteps stopped in front of his cell and didn't move. Could it be click? The sound of the cell's lock being opened followed. Was it me? The purpose was clearly the boy himself. As it turned out this way, various thoughts came to his mind. That man might have come to the prison to dispose of him who hadn't died. But why would he bother to seek out someone who was going to be executed? It doesn't matter. Regardless of the purpose, it had become clear that he was being targeted. The boy breathed as evenly as possible, so as not to let them notice that he hadn't succumbed to the sleeping incense. Swish, swish. The sound of someone entering while suppressing their presence was heard again, the intruder who had carefully snuck inside. Even with his eyes closed, he could feel their presence right in front of him. Tap. The intruder lightly nudged the boy with their foot. It seemed to be to check if he was really asleep. The boy relaxed his body and didn't move. Convinced that he was asleep, the intruder suddenly lifted the hair covering the front of the boy's face. The intruder's steady breathing momentarily stopped. He could sense an emotional disturbance. The boy, who had learned about ordinary people's emotions from his grandfather, could sensitively discern their state of mind through their expressions, actions, and breathing. It's a chance. Such agitation was an opportunity to target an enemy. The boy swiftly raised the wooden Kang-7, restraining his hands upward with great force. Thud. Ugh! The defenseless intruder was struck on the chin and staggered backward. The boy didn't miss this moment and tried to smash the intruder's head with the wooden Kang. Right at that instant, the intruder kicked the boy's abdomen with their foot. Thud. And as the boy was pushed back, the intruder quickly struck acupuncture points on his chest with their fingers. Tap, 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 tap. It felt as if his body had stiffened and couldn't move. As he wondered what this phenomenon was, the intruder muttered in disbelief. How are you not asleep? Chapter 2, Opportunity 2. The intruder couldn't hide his bewilderment. Even those who had trained their internal energy would fall into a deep sleep when caught off guard by the sleeping incense. Let alone ordinary people who hadn't learned martial arts. Just a whiff of this sleeping incense would make them suddenly fall asleep. However, something unexpected had happened. While everyone in the government office's prison had fallen asleep, this fellow was wide awake. Who the hell is this kid? Just to be sure, the intruder placed his hand on the boy's abdomen, and he tried injecting his internal energy. If the boy had even the slightest amount of internal energy, there would be a rebound. However, there's no rebound. The boy hadn't learned any internal energy at all. Then, as he had heard from the government official during the day, he was indeed an ordinary person. But why wasn't the sleeping incense working on the kid? This fellow? Moreover, he wasn't afraid of this situation. It was one thing to resist the sleeping incense, but a stranger had infiltrated the prison and immobilized him with acupuncture. Yet he was staring at the intruder with unwavering eyes, as if observing him. He's different. He had heard that the boy was a death row inmate, but he was somehow different from other ordinary boys his age. How should he put it? The boy gave off an unsettling feeling. The intruder found himself pondering for a moment. I guess, just then, someone's voice came from behind. "Haven't you found him yet?" Someone had walked into the prison from the back. They were also wearing a mask, but their build wasn't very large. No, their slender and slightly short stature indicated that they weren't a fully grown adult. The intruder quietly spoke. "Young master, I asked you to wait outside and keep watch." "Is that him?" Before the intruder could finish speaking, the masked youngster pointed with his finger and asked. It was the disheveled prisoner boy immobilized by acupuncture. The intruder nodded. "Yes, it is. I can't see his face clearly. Guard Gam, lift his hair." It seemed he wanted to check the boy's face. At those words, the intruder hesitated briefly before lifting the hair of the immobilized prisoner boy. Then, a gasp escaped the masked youngster's mouth. "Ah!" The masked youngster couldn't hide his genuine astonishment. The disheveled prisoner boy couldn't understand why they were reacting this way. Why were they showing such a reaction, including the intruder who had immobilized him like this? At that moment, the masked youngster removed his mask. The boy's eyes trembled. The face of the youngster behind the mask. It was as if he was looking into a mirror. The face resembled his own. He was astounded to the point of disbelief at the resemblance, as if they were twins. From the way their hair was styled to the subtle differences in their faces, if they were dressed similarly, even those who had known them for a long time might have trouble distinguishing between them. "Do we look alike?" "Almost identical." "Truly amazing." I was also shocked when I first saw this fellow. I can see why. What were the chances of a complete stranger having such a similar face? It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say it was nearly impossible. However, the prisoner boy and the unmasked youngster had nearly the same face. After marveling at the resemblance for a while, the unmasked youngster approached the prisoner boy and said, You're a death row inmate, right?" With even his mute acupoint sealed, there was no way he could answer. The youngster gave the intruder a look. Then the intruder struck the prisoner boy's chest with his fingers. Tap, 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 tap. After finishing the acupuncture, the youngster said, "Now you can answer. You're a death row inmate, right?" At that question, the prisoner boy remained still for a moment before replying, "That's right." The youngster raised the corners of his mouth at the polite response. "You seem to be well aware of your situation." After all, no matter how much of a death row inmate he was just an ordinary person. In front of martial artists, he was no different from a cat in front of a tiger. It would be strange if he didn't act politely. The youngster crossed his arms and spoke in an arrogant voice. "I heard your execution is scheduled for the day after tomorrow, right?" "That's correct. What would you do if you had a chance to live a little longer?" "I want to live." "Heh heh heh. Of course you would." The youngster couldn't hide his satisfaction. A death row inmate with no other options wouldn't hesitate to grab onto his pants if offered a chance to live. The youngster grinned and said, "Such an opportunity doesn't come easily." "You're quite a lucky fellow for a death row inmate. Are you giving me an opportunity?" "That's right, a very big opportunity." "What is it?" "Even if it's only for 5 days, it's not often that a bastard like you gets to live as Mok Jeong-un, the third young master of the great Yeon Mok Sword Manor one." Yeon Mok Sword Manor, he had never heard of it before. From what he heard, it seemed to be some large estate. The boy didn't know much, but the Yeon Mok Sword Manor was an old and prestigious martial arts clan located in the northern part of Anhui province. There was no way for him to know this, but one thing was certain. "You want me to be a stand-in?" At the prisoner boy's question, the corners of Mok Jeong-un's mouth curled up. "You're not stupid. That's right. Why would I need a death row inmate like you? What I need is that face of yours." There was only one reason he had sought out someone with the same face. It was to have him act as a substitute. "Do I just need to be a stand-in?" "It's only for 5 days. Were you expecting some grand task? All you have to do is stay confined in the clan's villa and pretend to be the real young master." "I see. You get to enjoy life as the young master of a prestigious clan for 5 days, and in return, you get to keep your life. What a great opportunity, isn't it?" It was certainly true. It made sense, but the boy wasn't foolish. In the first place, being a substitute meant taking on risks in place of the real person. There must be hidden dangers lurking for sure. A stand-in, however, he didn't have any other opportunities. He had been pondering how to escape the government office's prison in the first place. If he stayed put, he would be subjected to the cruel punishment of dismemberment. There was no need to think twice. Please give me the opportunity. Heh. Mok Jong-un chuckled and gestured. Then the masked intruder took out a small pouch from his bosom. The boy, puzzled by this, asked, "What is that?" "Eat it." He wondered what he meant, but the intruder took out a black pill from the pouch. A foul smell wafted out, and anyone could tell it had nothing to do with medicine. The intruder brought the pill to the boy's mouth. The boy looked at it and asked, "Is it poison?" At this, Mok Jong-un scoffed and said, "Did you think I would trust a mere death row inmate like you just like that? If you complete the substitution without any issues, I'll give you the antidote. Heh heh heh." It meant he was going to eliminate any chance of the boy doing anything reckless from the very beginning. The intruder pressed the poison pill against his lips and said, "Open your mouth." There was no choice. Looking at the grinning Mok Jong-un, the boy slowly opened his mouth and accepted the poison pill. As he watched the boy chew the pill, the intruder's eyes flickered with interest. Normally, if someone knew it was poison, they would make a distressed face and show signs of suffering, but the boy was chewing and swallowing it without any reaction. He wasn't just swallowing it whole either. He's indeed different. Although he had the same face as the young master, he was a vicious one. That must be why he became a death row inmate after killing many people without even learning martial arts. It was a good decision to prepare the poison pill in advance. Now that he had made him take it, if the boy wanted to live, he wouldn't be able to do anything reckless like trying to escape. The boy stopped chewing and opened his mouth wide. "I swallowed it, young master." It was confirmed that there was nothing left in his mouth. The size of the poison pill was too large to hide inside his mouth if he had pretended to swallow it. Once it was confirmed, Mok Jong-un ordered, "Untie him now." Understood. The intruder found the key from the key ring he had prepared and unlocked the wooden restraints binding the boy's hands and feet. Phew! As his limbs were freed, the boy felt like he could live. The wooden restraints were actually made of metal on the inside, pressing down on his wrists and making them incredibly heavy. The intruder approached the entrance of the prison and quietly said, "I will lead the way. You follow behind me. Young master, please follow behind him." All right. Since the boy had taken the poison pill, he wouldn't be able to escape, but it was a precautionary measure. If the intruder led the way and the young master watched from behind, how could the fellow escape? Even if he was a death row inmate, he was no different from a child compared to those who had learned martial arts. "Follow me." Just as he was about to open the prison door and leave, "You, ugh!" Thud, thump, startled by the sound from behind, the intruder turned his head. However, an unbelievable scene unfolded before his eyes. Mok Jong-un was lying on the floor with a shocked expression, his neck completely twisted and turned around. It had happened so suddenly that the intruder was momentarily at a loss for words. To him, the boy nonchalantly said, "What should we do about this? The death row inmate who was supposed to be the stand-in is dead." Chapter 3, Opportunity 3. Mok Jong-un, who died instantly as his neck was broken. The intruder was dazed for a very brief moment. However, it didn't last long. "You bastard!" Thwack. The intruder, his anger boiling over, swiftly reached out to the boy, grabbing his neck and slamming him against the wall. Thud. It was absurd. Even if Mok Jong-un was only a third-rate martial artist with mediocre skills, the boy was an ordinary civilian. Even if he was a death row inmate, the difference between him and someone who had learned martial arts was stark. But even if it was a surprise attack, did it make sense for Mok Jong-un's neck to be broken in an instant? As he wondered in disbelief, the boy spoke to him with an expressionless face. "Even if you used sleeping incense, you shouldn't make a commotion, right?" "What? You bastard, now you're—" The intruder furrowed his brows. He was grabbing the boy's neck, but there were no signs of distress. Rather, the boy was speaking perfectly fine. "This guy, now that I think about it, Why is his neck so? The boy's neck muscles were quite developed, like someone who had trained their external martial arts, to the extent that proper internal energy would be needed to break it. Could he have cultivated external martial arts? No, that can't be. If he had, he should have at least some internal energy. Even external martial arts required the foundation of internal energy circulation. However, this fellow truly had no internal energy. It seemed he wasn't a simple one. Although the intruder's mind was getting complicated, that wasn't the important matter at hand. You crazy bastard. The young master gave you an opportunity, but you've really gone mad. To actually do this to the person who gave a mere death row inmate like you a chance. Am I misunderstanding the purpose of being a stand-in? What? In the first place, being a stand-in means taking on risks in place of the real person. Of course, for me, it's an opportunity to extend my life by about 3 days. But if you went as far as breaking a death row inmate out of prison to have them act as a stand-in, doesn't it also mean you can dispose of them at any time? The boy spoke calmly. At his words, the intruder was momentarily at a loss for words. This fellow was more intelligent than he thought. If he were an ordinary civilian and a typical death row inmate, he would be preoccupied with overcoming the current crisis. No, how could he even do something like this in the first place? Not only did he analyze the situation in an instant, but he was also taking a gamble. Even though he could die at any moment. What kind of guy is he? As he found it absurd, the boy opened his mouth. May I ask you something? You bastard, can't you assess the situation? You said you're a bodyguard, but you're quite composed considering your master is dead. You little. If you have this much rationality left in a situation where you should want to kill me, it doesn't seem like you have much affection for your master, does it? Ha! The intruder was dumbfounded by the boy's words. He was reading his state of mind to an unpleasant degree. As the boy said, the intruder didn't have much affection for this good-for-nothing young master. He was just perplexed and angered by this unexpected situation. Of course, that didn't mean his judgment was clouded enough to immediately kill the boy and escape the government office's prison. This is ridiculous, to think he was being swayed by a mere death row inmate boy. As the boy said, now that things had come to this point, killing him was the right thing to do. However, if he lost the boy as well in a situation where the young master had already lost his life, the Yon Mock Sword Manor would hold him responsible with his own life. Damn it, this has become a real mess. His plan to somehow make the third young master the manor master and become the head of the Yon Mock Sword Manor, living out his old age in comfort, had turned to dust. Because of this damned death row inmate brat, all his investments had been for naught. As he felt frustrated, the boy said, If you don't particularly have any affection for him, how about switching horses? Switching horses' sides. Wouldn't it be more convenient to think of the one lying on the floor as a prisoner who will be executed the day after tomorrow? The boy spoke nonchalantly. Looking at him, the intruder was both dumbfounded and somehow felt a chill run down his spine. Wasn't this damned death row inmate essentially saying he would become Mok Jeong-un now? Squeeze. The intruder tightened his grip on the boy's neck. Urgh. Only now did the boy let out a slightly pained groan. The intruder glared at him and said, Did you, a mere death row inmate, kill the young master with that in mind? At his words, the boy chuckled and said, Is there any other reason? The intruder gulped at the boy's words. Just what kind of creature was he? His very thought process seemed to be on a completely different wavelength from ordinary people. His cunning was no joke. No, perhaps that's why he ended up as a death row inmate in the first place. This guy is dangerous. Regardless of whether the Yon Mock Sword Manor held him responsible or not, he thought it might be better to kill him now. His instincts were strongly telling him. Regardless of martial arts or age, getting involved with this fellow would bring nothing good. Squeeze. Ack. He applied even more force to his grip. It would be difficult for the boy to endure with internal energy. Don't make me laugh. It's better for you to just die here. Let's kill him, even if it meant starting anew. At that moment, the boy suddenly grabbed the intruder's wrist. Smack. It's no use. I might have killed the young master with luck, but I'm different. The intruder tried to lightly slap away the boy's hand with his opposite hand, infused with internal energy, but smack. This brat, the boy, resisted. It felt like hitting a thick tree trunk. He felt the resilience in the boy's wrist, and his muscles were extremely firm, enough to withstand a force infused with internal energy. In an instant, the intruder swiftly tore off the sleeve of the boy's prisoner's garment with his quick hand movements. The intruder's eyes widened. The shape of dense muscles was clearly visible. He almost let out a gasp at the sight of the muscles, developed as if he had trained only external martial arts for over a decade. Now the mystery was solved. No wonder the young master was overpowered. It wasn't just luck from a surprise attack. Judging by the density of this fellow's muscles, it would be difficult to inflict damage without considerable martial arts skill. With just his physique, he surpassed the level that a third-rate martial artist could handle. If a guy like this had properly learned martial arts, he might have become a high-level expert. However, to properly cultivate internal energy, one had to start between the ages of 5 and 10. If it was too late, impurities would accumulate in the meridians throughout the body, slowing down the circulation of internal energy. Squeeze! At that moment, the wrist grabbing the boy's neck started to ache. The boy was applying force, trying to remove the intruder's hand. What kind of strength does this bastard have? He was using the power of a 7th-level martial artist, yet the boy was trying to push it away with brute force. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say he was a powerhouse based on strength alone. If he let his guard down, it seemed like the boy might really break free. This won't do. The intruder then employed the grappling hand technique. Releasing the hand gripping the boy's neck, he grabbed the boy's wrist and twisted the joint, making it face towards his lower back. How it happened so quickly that the boy's wrist was twisted without any chance to resist. How did he do that? Was this also a martial art? If so, it seemed quite ingenious. He had used the boy's own strength to twist his wrist. However, thanks to that, the hand gripping his neck was released, making it easier to breathe and speak. Shing! The intruder was seen drawing something from his waist. It was a dagger. It seemed he was going to stab the boy with it. The boy then said, "Is there really a need to kill me?" "What? Since I'll die without the antidote, I have no choice but to listen to you, right?" At those words, the intruder momentarily stopped his attempt to stab the boy. The situation was so absurd that he had forgotten, but the boy had taken the poison pill he had brought. But remembering that made it even more ridiculous. To think a guy who had even taken a poison pill would do such a crazy thing. He was so puzzled as to why the boy had done this when he couldn't even live if the intruder didn't give him the antidote. Is it because he's the only substitute if the young master dies? His cunning was too much. Then the boy said, "I have no interest in the Yon Mok sword manor or being the third young master." "No interest? Then why are you doing this crazy thing now?" "I just have a reason to live a little longer." Live longer? What the hell was he talking about? As he wondered, the boy spoke in a meaningful tone. "Since you have the antidote, you can control me like a puppet as you wish." The intruder flinched at the boy's words. He had only thought his retirement plan had been ruined, because he had wanted to obtain a peaceful life, unlike in the past, and he wasn't without a sense of being fed up with going somewhere else and investing time. How much investigation and time had he spent to find the place he considered ideal? Control, as I wish for a moment, he fell into contemplation. It was a tempting offer, but he wasn't a fool. Although he had only briefly experienced it, this fellow was extremely dangerous. He was cunning and difficult to control. However, if he was someone who clung to his life to this extent, he wouldn't be able to defy the intruder for the time being, even if it was because of the poison pill. Should I take this opportunity to switch sides? There was only one reason he had tried to find a substitute in the first place, to save the young master's life. But the young master was already dead. Then using this fellow to switch sides was also a good method. If he became a powerful figure and tried to control this fellow from behind, it would only give him a headache as time passed. Yes, let's use him and dispose of him. After a brief contemplation, the intruder made a decision. To use the boy only until he could switch sides. The intruder warned, If you show even the slightest suspicious sign, I'll kill you. If you disobey my orders, you die." "Understood," the boy answered without a moment's hesitation. "If you don't take the antidote for the poison within 12 hours, the poison will spread throughout your body, so you better remember that." Thwack! Finally, the intruder released the twisted arm, and as the boy got up, he said, "From this moment on, you are Mok Jeong-un." "Understood." "Should I call you Sir Guard Gam?" "Yes. In front of others, I can speak casually to you, right?" "Right." He didn't want to be spoken down to by the boy, but it was certainly better to be clear. Then the boy, no Mok Jeong-un, approached the collapsed real Mok Jeong-un, and he started undressing him. Guard Gam watched with a displeased look. Even without being told, the boy was trying to swap clothes with the real one, showing how extremely cunning he was. He only felt sorry for the dead real Mok Jeong-un. Swish, swish. Mok Jeong-un took off the prisoner's garment top. Look at this guy. Inside his upper body were highly developed, dense muscles. Even with the red-stained bandages wrapped around his chest and abdomen, the shape of his muscles was distinct enough to imagine how developed they were. To think this is a body that hasn't trained external martial arts, he was even more amazed now than before. Guard Gam, who had been staring intently at Mok Jeong-un's upper body, narrowed his eyes. But the bandages suggest he suffered a severe injury, so why does he look fine on the outside? That was the question. If it were an old wound, it would be understandable, but it was recent. Yet Mok Jeong-un's complexion and movements seemed unaffected. What the hell is going on? He became curious about what this fellow had done to end up as a death row inmate. It seemed he would have to meet the government official acquaintance again. At that moment, Mok Jeong-un, who had changed clothes, turned his head to him and said, "May I borrow your dagger?" "Dagger, why?" Mok Jeong-un pointed to the head of the dead real Mok Jeong-un and spoke nonchalantly. "The young master's body is more frail than mine, so I think I'll have to take the body and leave only the head." It certainly made sense, but as expected, this fellow was unsettling. It seemed the best course of action was to switch sides quickly. Chapter 4. Yeon Mok Sword Manor 1. Mok Jeong-un unwrapped the bandages and looked at his upper body reflected in the mirror. There were scars from stab wounds on the left side of his chest and abdomen. Scars. Normally, even considerable wounds wouldn't leave scars. However, the wounds inflicted by that man's black sword had turned into scars. It seemed they would likely remain for life. Well, can't be helped. He had to be satisfied with surviving. Even he thought wounds of that extent would be fatal. But contrary to expectations, he had survived. He was aware that he had exceptional recovery abilities from the beginning, but his tenacity for life was beyond imagination. Is this a sign that I shouldn't go there yet? Fortunately. If he had to listen to his grandfather's nagging, he at least wanted to complete his revenge. That way it would be less unjust. Revenge? Thinking about revenge, he felt he was lucky. Who would have thought there would be someone in the world with the exact same face as him? Thanks to that, he could cleanse his identity. Should I say I'm lucky? Since the identity of the death row inmate had been killed, there would be no wanted posters saying he had escaped. In fact, more than the government office issuing wanted posters, he had something else in mind. They'll probably think I'm dead now, right? The middle-aged man with the black sword whom he had encountered while tracking his nemesis's traces. That man had appeared to kill him, but if the fact that he was alive was discovered, the man would undoubtedly show up again. Martial arts. He had clearly experienced it. That man was a monster he had encountered for the first time in his life. It seemed impossible to confront him without learning martial arts. In that regard, it seemed like a stroke of fate. The guy who had the same face as him was the third young master of the martial arts clan, Yeon Mok Sword Manor. He could now deceive that bastard and the world as the third young master of Yeon Mok Sword Manor, not as the sickle-slaying demon, and furthermore, an opportunity to learn martial arts had opened up. It has opened up, but there was just one problem. Mok Jeong-un looked at the black figure standing outside the door while putting on his top. It was the person Guard Gam had placed to monitor him. Because of that, he was confined to the villa and couldn't move except when going to the latrine. How annoying. The situation wasn't easy. It was no different from being imprisoned. Although they had made a deal as expected, Guard Gam didn't trust him at all. It would probably continue like this. It might be natural since he had boldly killed the real one right in front of his eyes. What should I do? If he stayed still, he would only be manipulated like this. There might not even be an opportunity to learn martial arts. It was a situation where he was stuck between a rock and a hard place, unable to do anything. Nevertheless, Mok Jong-un chuckled with a rather nonchalant face. Knock, knock. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. "Young master, I've brought your lunch." Soon the door opened, and a maid brought a tray of food. It was beef and eggplant stir-fry, bean sprouts, and rice. As she always did, the maid placed the tray on the round table by the window. She glanced at Mok Jong-un, who was buttoning his top and sitting on a chair. He's handsome. Among the 4 young masters of Yon Mok Sword Manor, Mok Jong-un's looks were by far the best, to the extent that the maids would compete to bring him his meals and want to see his face. One needed to have such small pleasures, didn't they? However, the maid slightly furrowed her brows. With a faint smile on his face, he didn't look any different from the usual Mok Jong-un. But what was this subtle sense of unfamiliarity? What is it? Something felt different. It was quite difficult to pinpoint exactly what it was. As the maid was puzzled inside, she was about to take the tray and leave when, wait a moment. Yes, about the beef and eggplant stir-fry. Yes, next time I'd like the beef to be less cooked. But if it's undercooked, the blood? Beef is more tender when it's rare, and it's delicious when it's slightly soaked in blood. He smiled brightly as he said that. The moment she saw his smile, a chill ran down the maid's spine. She seemed to understand why she felt the unfamiliarity. His mouth was smiling, but his eyes were staring at her without moving at all. It felt like her body was stiffening. "Is there a problem?" Well, once seized by fear, it was difficult to answer. "Right then, the chef will handle the cooking as he sees fit, young master." Mok Jong-un turned his head toward the door. Guard Gam was entering through the open door. He shook his head with a displeased look and waved his hand at the maid. The maid bowed her head and hurriedly went out. Thud. Guard Gam closed the door and approached Mok Jong-un, saying, "I warned you not to do anything conspicuous, didn't I?" Mok Jong-un picked up some rice with his chopsticks and replied, "Is asking for the beef to be cooked less considered conspicuous? You're Mok Jong-un, not a death row inmate. The paper you gave me to memorize didn't mention what kind of meat the real one preferred." Mok Jong-un calmly retorted. This bastard. Guard Gam's expression hardened at his attitude. It wasn't exactly wrong, but he didn't like how the boy talked back at every turn. It was annoying, and the way he was chewing his food was also irksome. Guard Gam sat across from him and said, "Judging by the way you're talking, I assume you've memorized everything I told you to, right?" "Yes, there wasn't much to it." "Not much to it. Ha. Then what's the name of the eldest young master?" "Mok Young-ho. Age 20. Has a mole on his left cheek and is so absorbed in women that he visits brothels every other day, the most incompetent among the 4 brothers, but greedy and tyrannical." One of Guard Gam's eyebrows rose. It was accurate without a single mistake. Since the real young master had written the information sheet himself, it was bluntly written from his own perspective. What about the second young master? Mok Yoon-pyong. Age 18, has droopy eyes like the main wife, cunning and treacherous. A piece of trash who would do anything to become the head of the clan. Mok Jong-un had memorized it exactly as it was written. The forceful handwriting gave a strong impression of dislike. It would be easier if he were a dimwit. Guard Gam clicked his tongue inwardly. As expected, the fellow was cunning and had memorized everything. There seemed to be no need to check further. Should I also talk about the 4th young master, or the real Mok Jong-un's usual habits? That's enough. Then I haven't finished my meal yet, so may I continue? HMPH. Eat and listen. Understood. Guard Gam got up from his seat, looked out the window with his hands behind his back, and opened his mouth. Although you've familiarized yourself with the information on the sheet, you'll hardly have any occasions to meet other people in this household. Why is that? Even if you have the same face as the young master, the longer the tail, the more likely it is to get stepped on. In the first place, we just need to avoid creating such situations. So you're saying I should stay cooped up inside? You catch on quick. This doesn't seem much different from being a substitute. You volunteered to be a puppet instead of a substitute. Since you chose that path yourself, you just need to do as you're told. Guard Gam made it clear, so that this cunning fellow couldn't have any other thoughts. I just need to do as I'm told, right? That's right. Is there anything else I need to know? No. At Guard Gam's final words, Mok Jong-un, who had been using his chopsticks, narrowed his eyes. He had been told about the information he needed to be familiar with, but other than habits or personal details that wouldn't easily give away the fact that he was a fake, he wasn't told anything else. Especially the most important information. He's not telling me why a substitute was needed. Of course, he had guessed that they might not tell him. Because of this, Mok Jong-un could be certain of one thing. Are they planning to leave me in a dangerous situation that requires a substitute? Otherwise, there would be no reason not to tell him. They had made him take a poison pill, and now that the real Mok Jong-un was dead, he thought they would utilize him for a while since he was the only substitute. But it seemed that wasn't the case. They probably had another hidden card up their sleeve. The corners of Mok Jong-un's mouth curled up savagely as he was lost in thought. They're trying to switch sides. Thud. Guard Gam, who had closed the door, said to the sharp-eyed, middle-aged man guarding outside, "Make sure he never escapes. And if someone comes looking for him, come up with an excuse that he's not feeling well or something so he doesn't come face to face with others." Understood. I'll be out for a bit. As he was about to leave, the middle-aged man whispered, "Captain." But is there really a need to switch sides? Huh. You've made him take the poison pill anyway. Wouldn't it be better to just control that fake fellow? After all, the reason you chose the third young master. That fellow is no good. What? What do you mean? I mean he's not someone who can be easily controlled. At Guard Gam's words, the middle-aged man inwardly scoffed. No matter how much of a death row inmate the fellow was, he was just an ordinary civilian who hadn't learned martial arts. Yet, it was amusing how the captain was overreacting like this. Perhaps because he had retired from the front lines and lived as a bodyguard, his sharpness had indeed dulled compared to the past. If it bothered him that much, he could just step on the fellow and teach him a lesson. However, regardless of his own thoughts, he couldn't talk back to the captain. I understand. Watch him closely. If he tries to do anything unnecessary, subdue him with the grappling hand technique. I allow you to inflict some pain except for the face. Oh ho, really? That might be better for that fellow. Anyway, guard him well. Understood. The middle-aged man raised the corners of his mouth in satisfaction. About 15 minutes after Guard Gam left, the closed door opened. The middle-aged man guarding the door blocked Mok Jong-un, who was trying to go out. Where do you think you're going? I'm going out for a bit. To the latrine? No, I thought I'd take a look around outside the villa. I needed someone to talk to anyway, so would you like to come with me? Mok Jong-un spoke nonchalantly. Seeing his attitude, the middle-aged man shook his head in disbelief. The captain had just left, and he was already trying to run out. The middle-aged man spoke in a cold tone. If you don't want to see a rough sight, go back in right now. Did you say go Chan? I think nothing will happen if the two of us just keep our mouths shut. Before Mok Jong-un could finish speaking, swish, swish, smack. The middle-aged man, no, Go Chan, swiftly grabbed Mok Jong-un's wrist and twisted it behind his back. It was a grappling hand technique. According to the captain, although the boy's external strength was not remarkable, his muscle density was unusual, so rather than striking, it was easier to subdue him by twisting his joints. Nothing special. Using the grappling hand technique after a long time, it seemed his skills hadn't rusted. Feeling better after twisting the boy's arm, he whispered into Mok Jong-un's ear, "You seem to have forgotten your place, but you're not the real Mok Jong-un. There's nothing good about unnecessarily provoking me." Squeeze. He twisted the wrist even more. Regardless of his muscles, having his joint twisted must be painful. "Go back in and stay put," Go Chan warned in a low voice. He thought the boy would naturally go back in on his own after this much, but what if I don't want to? What? Go Chan snorted in disbelief. He had heard the boy's thinking was unusual, but he seemed out of his mind. If he didn't want to go back in obediently, what else could he do? Foolish fellow. Go Chan struck the back of Mok Jeong-un's neck with his hand infused with internal energy. Smack! With this much force, regardless of his muscles, he would faint from the impact. That's what he thought, but something was strange. It felt like he had hit a wooden pillar. What? He thought the boy would definitely collapse, but he was enduring it just fine. Thinking he might not have used enough internal energy, he tried to apply more, but Mok Jeong-un's voice was heard. You do seem weaker than Guard Gam. This bastard. It seemed he didn't feel any pain at all. Otherwise, how could he speak so calmly after being hit on the back of the neck? Feeling unsettled, Go Chan decided it wouldn't do and tried to twist Mok Jeong-un's wrist even more to slam him to the ground. However, squeeze, no matter how much he twisted, the boy didn't budge. No, the boy was straightening his twisted wrist and forearm. What the hell? Startled, Go Chan summoned his martial power to the fullest. He couldn't worry about the fellow getting hurt or not. He had to subdue him first and then see. But, the moment he tried to draw upon his martial power, his body floated upward with a whoosh. Then he was slapped down in front of the boy. Thud. Ugh. Fortunately, it didn't seem like he was thrown down too hard. He quickly tried to bounce his waist and get up, but Mok Jeong-un grabbed his neck with his right hand. Squeeze. Gah! The strength of that grip was so immense that it felt like his neck would break at any moment. Go Chan's eyes trembled and started to turn bloodshot. He hurriedly grabbed the boy's wrist and tried to push it away to free himself. But it wouldn't budge at all. This bastard, what the hell is he? How can he be so strong? In terms of martial arts, he had reached the second-rate level. It was no exaggeration to say that he possessed twice the strength of an average adult man. Yet, he couldn't handle the strength of one hand of this fellow who hadn't even learned martial arts. Gah. His breath was getting cut off. It felt like his face would burst. Struggling in agony, he suddenly caught a glimpse of the boy's face. Smiling, the corners of the boy's mouth were curled up to his ears. He had a face like an innocent child playing with a toy. Chapter 5. Yon Mok Sword Manor 2? What the hell is this bastard? Not only was his breath being cut off, but a chill ran down his spine. The gaze in Mok Jeong-un's eyes, as he was grinning from ear to ear, was strangely spine-chilling. Now he understood why Guard Gam, the captain, had said those words. I mean, he's not someone who can be easily controlled. He thought it was just something he said. But actually experiencing it, the boy was clearly different from ordinary people. Even without having learned martial arts, his immense strength and the ominous pressure in his eyes were crushing his mind like pulp. Squeeze? Ugh. The force squeezing his throat intensified. He endured it with his internal energy, but he couldn't hold on any longer. Seeing his eyes burning, it seemed he would soon lose consciousness. At that moment, swish, the hand gripping his neck loosened. Cough, cough. As his blocked airway opened, he coughed as if choking. Amidst that, he was puzzled. Why Mok Jeong-un, who had been enjoying it with a grin up to his ears, stopped smiling. Then he spoke as if he were disappointed. I almost killed you. Cough, cough, what? If I kill you like this, becoming Mok Jeong-un would be meaningless, wouldn't it? At Mok Jeong-un's words, Go Chan's eyes wavered. It felt like the boy was toying with him. Just what was this bastard? Go Chan, his anger surging, opened his mouth with trembling lips. You have the confidence to handle the consequences of doing this. Consequences? Without the antidote, you will die, and it will be a very painful death. Go Chan mentioned the poison Mok Jeong-un had ingested. He thought this fake fellow would also know that and stop midway. But it was too late. He had already seen this fellow's unsettling side. As the captain said, this fellow was someone who could never be controlled. Although he didn't know what would happen after 5 days if he were to switch sides, it would be better to kill him in any way possible. If I leave him be, he will surely stab me in the back. However, at the moment, the one holding the knife was this fellow, so he had to make him realize his position. Go Chan spoke in a low voice. If Guard Gam finds out, he won't let you off easy. That's probably true. But I'll consider this incident as an impulsive act. What does that mean? I'll consider it as something you did out of frustration from being confined, so go back to your room now. Go back to my room? Yes. If you obediently go back on your own, I'll pretend what just happened never occurred." At those words, Mok Jong-un smiled brightly and said, "If that were the case, I wouldn't have bothered coming out." Go-chan frowned. Did this fellow really not understand the situation? Why was a bastard who had even taken a poison pill and had his life at stake acting so arbitrarily? If the captain, no, guard Gam, finds out. Yes, he won't just let it slide. But now, if you resist here, if guard Go keeps his mouth shut, nothing will happen. What's the problem? What? Go-chan was dumbfounded by Mok Jong-un's brazen words. As his senior said, he really seemed uncontrollable. Go-chan spoke, trying to suppress his anger. They must have told you that if you don't take the antidote or neutralizer within the hour, your life will also end, but you can't come to your senses. Before he could finish his words, monkshood, aconite, hemlock, pinealia. At the medicinal herbs, no, poisonous herbs coming out of Mok Jong-un's mouth, Go-chan's expression instantly hardened. They were all plants that went into the poison pill. Woodbine 1, magic mushroom, Dutchman's pipe. Is that about it? Impossible. Go-chan was dumbstruck. Even if he got 1 or 2 wrong, it would have been understandable, but he was accurate. He correctly identified all the toxic ingredients that went into the poison pill. The reason he was so shocked wasn't simply because the boy guessed the ingredients. The poison pill was made by combining these ingredients, boiling them, and drying them to make the pill, so it couldn't be identified just by tasting it. What the hell are you? Even the poison Emperor Cho Akjeong or the medicine Immortal Mun No, would they be capable of this? Didn't they say he was an ordinary death row inmate? He was curious about this fellow's true identity. As he was astounded, Mok Jong-un said, "Since I was young, I ate all sorts of medicinal and poisonous herbs. I tried boiling them and drying them." What? You ate poisonous herbs? An herbalist must know their effects, they said. It's not just for that reason, though. He knew there were other reasons, but it didn't matter now. Anyway, Mok Jong-un could distinguish medicinal herbs with sensitive precision. No, if it was something he had personally tasted or even slightly smelled, he remembered it. Even his grandfather would stick out his tongue in amazement at that. A herbalist, you say? Oh, you didn't know. I originally lived by gathering medicinal herbs. Nonsense. How can a mere herbalist identify the ingredients in a poison pill just by tasting it? It was something that couldn't be possible. Judging by your surprise, I guess I was right. Mok Jong-un approached him as he was startled. As he suddenly closed the distance, Go-chan unknowingly took a step back. Go-chan hurriedly said, "Even if you know that, what do you think you can do? Making the antidote is even more difficult than the poison pill." He gathered internal energy in his Yongchen Acupoint 2 to use lightness skill if necessary. This fellow was extremely unsettling. He had to be prepared because he didn't know what he would do. Even if his strength is greater than ordinary people, he hasn't learned martial arts. Then if I use the lightness skill, he won't be able to catch up. He thought it would be fine as long as he didn't directly confront him. Right at that moment, crunch, as Mok Jong-un took a step, the wooden floor beneath his foot was dented. It was an immense leg strength. Oh no. As if a tiger was pouncing, Mok Jong-un instantly charged forward. Jumping back was useless. Mok Jong-un's speed was too fast to secure any distance. Thwack, Mok Jong-un's hand stretched out. Thinking he would naturally aim for the neck or head, Go-chan tried to defend by crossing his arms. But that wasn't it. Tap, 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 tap. Ugh! Mok Jong-un's fingers struck acupuncture points on his chest. Go-chan's eyes widened. He was certain this fellow didn't know any martial arts. In fact, there were no signs of him having cultivated internal energy, so he thought that was the case. But the acupoints he just struck were the paralysis acupoint that stiffened the body and the mute acupoint that prevented speech. Could it have been a lie? He accurately struck the acupoints. Once the acupoints were sealed, he shouldn't be able to move or speak. However, even though his chest ached and his body felt creaky, he could still move. What is this? As he wondered what was going on, Mok Jong-un tilted his head and muttered, "Was it not like this?" What? I tried imitating what Guard Gam did, but it doesn't seem to work. I thought doing it this way would make the body unable to move and prevent speech. Mok Jong-un spoke nonchalantly. At his words, Go-chan was not only dumbfounded but also flabbergasted. If this was true, did it mean he had imitated exactly what he had experienced himself? He imitated what he saw. If he knew nothing, he would have thought the boy had learned it. He might have even thought the boy had practiced it dozens of times to perform it. Because he had struck the acupoints almost accurately. Just who is this guy? If he had internal energy, the acupoints would have been sealed. It ended with his body stiffening slightly because the boy had just poked them forcefully without skill. As he was stunned and at a loss for a moment, grab. Gah! While he was caught off guard, Mok Jong-un grabbed his neck. Since he was standing, he tried to kick the boy's groin with his foot, but crack. His neck was slightly twisted. If he applied a little more force here, it would snap. As his life was in danger, Go-chan couldn't move an inch in that state. Stop. If you don't want the antidote. About that. It's still a secret from Guard Gam, but actually I don't need it. What? What the hell was he talking about? He doesn't need the antidote. As he wondered what was going on, Mok Jong-un smiled and said, Since I ate so many poisonous herbs from a young age, I developed a resistance. Resistance? Well, my stomach would ache when I ate them, but a crude mixture like the one Guard Gam gave me doesn't even faze me. Crude mixture. Go-chan was dumbfounded. The poison pill still used by the Society 3 was crude. This was a poison pill with such potent toxicity that even a first-rate internal martial arts master, if affected, would have difficulty detoxifying it even after cultivating Kai for half a month. Just what is this guy? If anyone else had said it, he would have dismissed it as nonsense. But strangely, it was hard to deny the boy's words. At that moment, Mok Jong-un did something strange. Chomp! He suddenly bit his own index finger. Go-chan didn't know why he was doing that, but the boy suddenly brought his bleeding finger to Go-chan's mouth. What are you trying to DMMPH? He couldn't refuse. Mok Jong-un's finger invaded his mouth. Drops of blood wet his tongue and flowed down his throat. With an uneasy feeling, he tried not to swallow, but he had no choice because his neck was being gripped. But not long after swallowing the blood, his chest became hot. A burning pain suddenly engulfed his body. Even after Mok Jong-un released his grip, the pain was so intense that it felt like his internal organs were twisting. Poison. No matter how he thought about it, this was poison. Otherwise, there was no way it could cause such pain. Go-chan hurriedly tried to circulate his Kai, but as he tried to sit cross-legged, Mok Jong-un kicked his body. Oof! Thanks to that, he rolled on the floor. As he was suffering, Mok Jong-un crouched down and said, There were a few things my grandfather told me not to do. One of them is this. Not only have I developed a resistance from eating many poisonous herbs, but he said my blood also carries toxicity. What? A dog I raised accidentally licked my blood and had a seizure. It was vomiting blood and going crazy. You. The twisting pain prevented him from speaking. Regardless, Mok Jong-un giggled and looked at him. Swish. As he was suffering, Mok Jong-un grabbed his chin and lifted it up. Then he spoke as if admonishing, It's okay. Grandfather told me how to treat it, and it improved. Ow. Go-chan clutched Mok Jong-un's knees. Unable to speak, he looked at him imploringly. Then Mok Jong-un smiled brightly and said, From now on, I believe you'll help me a lot. Gelsemium right arrow curving left the Yongchen acupoint, also known as the bubbling spring or gushing spring. Acupoint is located on the sole of the foot, in the depression below the ball of the foot when the toes are flexed. Right arrow curving left Murim people in General Right Arrow Curving Left Chapter 6. Yon Mok Sword Manner 3. A pale-faced man in his 50s lay on the sick. He seemed to have difficulty breathing, constantly coughing. Whenever the old physician by his side wiped his mouth with a cloth, blood of a black color stained it. Sigh. Seeing this, a sigh escaped the old physician's lips. As his condition worsened, the end seemed near. Despite using all his knowledge and experience to treat him, in his long years as a physician, this was the first time he had encountered such an illness. Is there really nothing that can be done? As the personal physician of Yon Mok Sword Manor, he could envision the situations that would unfold in the future. There would be bloody conflicts between the brothers. Manor Master, you should have just designated a successor. The Manor Master had not chosen a successor. Because of that, even the clan's retainers could only watch the current situation helplessly. In fact, everyone knew the truth. If you liked him that much, you should have made the youngest one your successor. The Manor Master had cherished the youngest, Mok Yuchen. His talent was so outstanding that it might appear only once in 3 generations. At the age of 14, he had mastered the clan's martial arts and reached the level of a first-rate master. Now, at just 16, 2 years later, he had reached the threshold of the pinnacle. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his overwhelming talent was among the top 10 of his generation's prodigies. Moreover, his personality also resembled the Manor Master's. Young Master Mok Yuchen. If the Manor Master had openly supported him, the retainers would have stepped forward to solidify his position, even if he was just the son of a courtesan. Of course, doing so would incur the wrath of the main wife. This is a big problem indeed. The main wife's affection for her eldest son, Mok Yongho, was unwavering. Even if he was called a scoundrel, that didn't change. Because of this, from the second young master to the third young master, they had begun to overtly display their greed. The moment the Manor Master drew his last breath, Yon Mok's sword manor would be stained with the blood of the brothers. What will happen in the future? Sigh. As a mere physician, he couldn't intervene. As he was lamenting, the door to the Manor Master's room opened. Who is it? The old physician's expression hardened as he turned his head. A face with wrinkles covered by powder, as white as snow. Lips dyed red with rouge, adorned with luxurious jewelry and attire. With upturned eyes and a gaze filled with arrogance, this middle-aged lady was Yon Mok Sword Manor's main wife, Lady Siak. The old physician lowered his head. Madam. As expected. At her question, the old physician nodded with a faint sigh. My medical skills are lacking, so there seems to be nothing I can do. I see. Indeed, there is no way for him to survive with medicine. It is because I am incompetent. Swish. Lady Siak waved her hand, indicating she didn't want to hear it. Then, with a sigh, she said, when all the renowned physicians in the vicinity, including you, say they don't even know the name of the illness and that it can't be explained by medicine, calling it a strange phenomenon, there is only one way left. Madam. At those words, the old physician looked at Lady Siak, his white beard trembling. Lady Siak then glared coldly at the old physician and said, with my husband's life hanging by a thread, are you in a position to be picky? But the art of divination is ultimately just a bizarre method of looking at trivial signs. How can such superstitious? Didn't you say with your own mouth that my husband's illness is no different from a strange phenomenon? That may be so, but... Then why do you oppose using a diviner one who deals with strange phenomena? Are you telling me to just wait for my husband to die? That's not what I meant. I don't want to hear it. I have already summoned a diviner to the annex, so Physician Ha should stop and leave. Madam. Do you want to be forcibly dragged out? At these words, the old physician had no choice but to leave, as if he were being driven out. It was already a situation where he couldn't do anything. The old physician, who had come outside, clicked his tongue as if he were regretful and looked at the main building where the sick was located, bringing in a diviner to treat a strange phenomenon. Sigh. She's determined to kill a person with a diviner. This is the current situation of Yon Mok Sword Manor. What an interesting family this is. Interesting? He just learned about the situation he was in, and that's what he says. Go Chan was dumbfounded by Mok Jong-un's reaction. In a sense, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Mok Jong-un was in the most precarious position. If the fact that he was a fake was discovered, he might be torn apart and killed by the retainers, not just the other young masters. Yet, despite hearing this, he was exceedingly composed. I have no idea what he's thinking. If he were in Mok Jong-un's position, he would try to escape somehow. It was a situation with no solution. Even Guard Gam, the captain, was preparing to abandon this fellow. In the end, the fellow would inevitably be caught in the middle and eliminated. Even if you subdued me with poison, there's nothing you can do in this situation, you bastard. For now, he had no choice but to follow along. However, he had no intention of helping Mok Jong-un succeed, so he had hidden some information. If the truth was 7 parts, he had hidden about 3 parts related to them. Just wait and see. If he could just detoxify the poison no matter what, he would flinch. Go Chan, who made eye contact with Mok Jong-un, trembled. Just looking into the boy's eyes sent chills down his spine. It was pathetic of him to be intimidated like this, but this fellow was somehow different from ordinary people. There was something about him that made people fear him. A devilish bastard. Yes, that description suited him best. He still couldn't forget those ominous eyes. Guard go. Why, yes. Go Chan straightened up and replied. Regardless of his inner thoughts, his instincts told him to unconditionally obey the boy's words for now. So originally, the real Mok Jong-un and Guard Gam planned to use me as a substitute and have the eldest young master, Mok Yong-ho, kill Mok Yun-pyong, right? That's correct. That was their initial best course of action. The plan was called the Fisherman's Gain 2. They had envisioned a scenario where the eldest young master, Mok Yong-ho, would backstab the second young master, Mok Yun-pyong, who would let his guard down thinking the substitute had been killed. To this end, they had even planted false hopes in Mok Yong-ho through a courtesan they had recruited. They put quite a bit of thought into it. Mok Jong-un chuckled. The plan seemed plausible. If they had proceeded this way, the main wife, who was the mother of the 2 young masters, and her maternal family would not have been able to significantly intervene. Rather, it would have become a disgrace for them. It would have been good, but I became the variable. Now he understood why Guard Gam wanted to switch sides. Guard Gam didn't trust him. If he had trusted him, or had the confidence to completely control him, he would have slightly modified this best plan and carried it out as is. But because he distrusted him, he wouldn't do that. In the end, Guard Gam's change of heart and the situation of this family could only work against him in any way. Is there only one conclusion? He had to either kill Guard Gam or bring him to his side. However, both the former and the latter were difficult. The latter was difficult because Guard Gam had no faith in him, and in the case of the former, unlike Go Chan, Guard Gam was definitely stronger than him. Therefore, it was difficult to kill him. Guard Go. Yes. How much stronger is Guard Gam compared to you? Compared to me? Yes. Guard Gam is a first-rate master, so he's probably 2 to 3 times stronger than me. Go Chan possessed the skills of a second-rate warrior. On the other hand, Guard Gam was a first-rate master. In terms of internal energy, he had almost reached half a cycle, 30 years. So numerically speaking, it was more than twice that, but considering his enlightenment and skills, it had to be considered 3 times. That was the typical difference between second-rate and first-rate. In your opinion, Guard Go, do you think I can kill Guard Gam? What? I mean literally. Do you think I can kill him? At this question, Go Chan furrowed his brows. After learning about the situation of the family, did he make up his mind to kill Guard Gam? But this fellow still didn't know that they were trying to switch sides. Or did he deduce it from the fragmentary information? Gulp. If that was the case, his insight was truly remarkable. What kind of fellow was he? He was on a different level from the real Mok Jong-un in terms of using his brain. Is the question difficult? Guard Go, you fought with me too, so you should have a rough idea. At Mok Jong-un's words, Go Chan hesitated for a moment before answering. Even if the young master is strong and has good movements, it's difficult to compare the technical aspects and internal energy of a first-rate master with a novice like me. So in conclusion, I can't win, right? Yes. Don't be so cautious, I think so too. If he knew, then why was he asking? As he wondered, Mok Jong-un changed the question. Then if I learn this so-called martial arts, would the odds change a bit? What? What if I learn martial arts? At Mok Jong-un's question, Go Chan almost scoffed. He acknowledged that this fellow was stronger than him, a second-rate warrior, and he also acknowledged that he was different from ordinary people. However, learning martial arts was a completely separate issue. Go Chan managed to control his expression and said, Young master, the foundation of martial arts is internal energy cultivation. Internal energy cultivation? Yes. Internal energy cultivation refers to circulating the natural energy through breathing techniques, that is, inhalation and exhalation, to gather internal energy within the body. And, as internal energy accumulates, you become stronger and more powerful. It seems to be that way. In his life, Mok Jong-un had never met anyone stronger than him, but those who had learned martial arts were different. However, this internal energy cannot be accumulated overnight. Are you saying it takes time? Yes. It varies from person to person and depends on the breathing technique, but internal energy is formed and accumulated through long-term cultivation. But even if you learn martial arts, can you catch up to someone who has cultivated for many years in a short period of time? And you're already too late. There was also an appropriate starting age for internal energy cultivation. It was suitable to start between the ages of 5 and 9 because, at a younger age, the body is flexible, and impurities have not accumulated in the meridians. At Mok Jong-un's age, impurities would have already accumulated considerably, narrowing the meridians. You're saying it's difficult in the short term? Yes. No, it will be difficult even if you cultivate for a lifetime. Go-chan didn't mention this fact. He didn't feel the need to tell him, and even if he did, it would only make Mok Jong-un uncomfortable and possibly lead him to harm Go-chan. It's useless to struggle. Now you understand your situation, right? The Manor Master was on the verge of death. Both Yon Mok Sword Manor's personal physician and other renowned physicians said it was difficult. In the first place, it was an illness of unknown cause, to the extent that it was called a strange phenomenon. If such a Manor Master were to lose his life, no matter how much this fake fellow struggled, it would be the end for him. Just wait. When that moment comes, I will repay all this humiliation. Thud. At that moment, Mok Jong-un stood up. Then, gesturing to Go-chan, he said, "Let's go." What? Where? Was he trying to escape? If that was the case, it would be a foolish choice. Guide me to where the Manor Master is. What? Why do you suddenly want to go where the Manor Master is? At those words, Mok Jong-un chuckled and said, "Since my life is tied to the Manor Master's life and death, I want to see for myself how critical his condition is." Bangsa Chinese letter Fangxi equals individuals who are scholarly trained in the arts of geomancers, mysticism, divination. While similar to shamans, diviners or method masters pay attention to set of rules and theories. Right arrow curving left comes from an idiom of how a fisherman who unexpectedly benefits from a seemingly unfortunate situation. Right arrow curving left. Chapter 7. Strange Phenomena. 1. In front of the room where the Manor Master was staying. Lady Siak, the main wife of Yon Mok Sword Manor, who had been waiting with a straight posture, looked in the direction of the footsteps ascending the floor. A middle-aged man with a goatee, wearing a shabby Taoist robe with a yin-yang symbol, carrying a backpack loaded with old books and instruments, appeared. He was the diviner Lady Siak had summoned. This diviner, called Myo-sin, was known to be quite skilled in Mengcheng County 1. Lady Siak scrutinized his appearance from top to bottom with a doubtful face and clicked her tongue softly. She had an attitude of not caring whether the diviner was offended or not. Despite her attitude, the diviner showed no particular reaction and instead catered to her mood. "Can I see the Manor Master now?" "Yes." "That's fortunate. The longer a strange phenomenon lasts, the worse the situation becomes. Then please have everyone within 30 steps of the main building where the Manor Master is staying leave. If they are close, they may catch the impurities from the Manor Master." "I've done just that." What good would it be to leave prying eyes around when calling a diviner? She had already cleared the surroundings with a suitable excuse. If Madam could also step back. Swish. At that moment, Lady Siak slightly raised her hand and said, "You remember the favor I asked of you, right?" At this, the diviner smiled and replied, "Of course." "Good. Since Diviner Mayo is said to be so miraculous, I will trust you." Then, lowering her voice to a whisper, she continued, "If you can just find out where the Manor Master's seal and secret manuals are, I will immediately give you 300 silver taels as promised." "Oh my, thank you." Diviner Myo-sin bowed his head repeatedly, expressing his gratitude. Seeing his behavior, Lady Siak let out a soft sigh. "Phew." In fact, she didn't have much faith in divination or such things. It was just that she had changed her mind due to a certain opportunity. She had called the diviner with a glimmer of hope. If only you had given your support to that child, none of this would have happened. To think of making the son of a mere courtesan the successor. Resentment filled Lady Siok's eyes as she looked at the door to the manor master's room. On the way to the main building of Yon Mok Sword Manor, where the manor master was staying. Walking side by side as a guide, Go Chan glanced at Mok Jong-un. What is he thinking? It was true that the manor master's life was directly tied to the fellow's. But what would he do by seeing the manor master in such a state? Could he be thinking of trying to save him? That would be even more absurd. I understand that his knowledge of medicinal herbs is exceptional, but the manor master had already been given up on by the clan's personal physician and all the renowned physicians in the vicinity. They said it was a strange phenomenon, and the exact symptoms and illness were unknown. The moment the term strange phenomenon was used, it meant there was nothing that could be done. Just what is his ulterior motive? He couldn't read this fellow's thoughts at all. More than that, isn't he worried about himself? Rather, Go Chan was concerned about something else. If he unnecessarily stood out and interacted with others and his identity as a fake was exposed, there might be trouble before he could switch sides with Guard Gam. At that moment, Mok Jong-un looked somewhere and asked, "What is that place for?" "That is the martial arts training ground." The place Mok Jong-un pointed to with his head was the first training ground. In Yon Mok Sword Manor, there were a total of 4 training grounds, including the manor master's exclusive training ground. The third training ground was for the ordinary warriors of the clan. The second training ground was for the retainers to cultivate their martial arts, and the last first training ground was exclusively for the young masters. A place to cultivate martial arts. Interest flickered in Mok Jong-un's eyes. Seeing this, Go Chan clicked his tongue inwardly. In a situation where his life and death were uncertain, the desire for martial arts was nothing but a vain delusion. Even if you start learning now, do you think you can catch up to Captain Gam? It would be difficult for him to even take his first steps, yet it was honestly amusing that he was already thinking of learning martial arts to kill a first-rate master. Then, Mok Jong-un suddenly called out to him, "Guard Go?" "Why, yes. Every time I look at you, Guard Go, I feel like you have eyes that are tempting to play with." Go Chan flinched and suddenly stopped in his tracks. He stiffly turned his head and Mok Jong-un put his arm around his shoulder and said, "It seems you're not one of my people yet." "Oh, how could that be?" "You should look ahead, Guard Go. Is someone going to eat you?" Damn bastard. He was genuinely anxious. Mok Jong-un's eyes were precisely staring at his left eye. With a lick of his lips, it was as if he was dying to pluck out his eyeball. Go Chan trembled and took a step forward. Mok Jong-un grinned at him and said, "It's a pity." "Right. What?" It felt like cold sweat was running down his spine. The more he got to know this fellow, the more he felt like he had provoked something he shouldn't have. Suppressing this uneasy feeling as much as possible, Go Chan walked forward. Then, someone in the training ground caught Go Chan's eye. In the training ground, there was a boy with a strong impression, his upper body bare. The boy, with well-developed tan muscles on his upper body, was practicing horse stance while sweating profusely. Mok Yuchen. He was the youngest young master, Mok Yuchen. Despite having innate martial talent, his passion was so great that he invested all his time in martial arts training except for meals and sleep. It was no wonder the manor master favored him. He's attached. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the first training ground was Mok Yuchen's exclusive ground. Someone is training over there. At Mok Jong-un's remark, Go Chan said in a whisper, "That's the youngest young master." "The youngest, is that Mok Yuchen?" "That's right." "Is that how martial arts are practiced?" "He's building leg strength through horse stance. It can be said that the foundation of all martial arts comes from the lower body." "I see." "Young master, it would be better not to stare at the youngest young master. You might get entangled unnecessarily." "Just by looking." Go Chan frowned and looked at him. He must have read the information sheet Guard Gam had given him. The real Mok Jong-un's martial arts skill was at the third-rate level. But since he was a fake, if he acted recklessly and clashed with others, his identity as a fake might be exposed, and there was an even bigger problem. Go Chan whispered, "The youngest young master really dislikes the real young master." "Ah," Mok Jong-un nodded. On the information sheet written by the real Mok Jong-un, it was stated like this: "I can't stand the sight of that lowly bastard boasting about his martial talent. It's unlikely to happen, but if you happen to run into him, refrain from engaging in conversation." He was wary of him to the extent of writing this. Something must have happened. Why does he dislike him? After hesitating for a moment, Go Chan whispered into his ear. The real young master disparaged the youngest young master's mother as a vulgar courtesan and got beaten to a pulp. That was 2 years ago. He still remembered. The sight of the real Mok Jong-un crawling on the floor with his leg bones and ribs shattered. He was begging for his life like crazy. Because of that incident, the youngest young master, Mok Yuchen, genuinely hated Mok Jong-un. He seems to have a kind heart. What? Judging by the fact that he left his limbs intact. His brows furrowed. As expected, this fellow had a different thought process. Even if he was a fake, it was like talking about himself. Anyway, now was not the time for this. In any case, let's go quickly. It's better not to run into the other young masters right now. It could become really dangerous. At Go Chan's urging, Mok Jong-un silently chuckled. It was a truly interesting place, seeing the brothers quarreling like this. And so, they passed the training ground and headed to the main building where the manor master was. Looking at the pavilion leading to the main building, Go Chan frowned. What's going on? Usually, the clan's guard warriors would be guarding the front of the pavilion at the entrance of the main building, but there was no one. Come to think of it, the surroundings were too quiet. Not a single shadow could be seen. This is troublesome. Due to the manor master's worsening condition, even the young masters were not allowed to enter the main building by Lady Siok's order. Therefore, he thought they would be stopped anyway and had to turn back, so he guided Mok Jong-un without saying anything. But now, it seemed they would really get to see the manor master. Inside the manor master's room. Around the manor master's bed where he lay, a dozen red threads formed a boundary, and silver coins with holes in the center were flowing down between the threads. Clang, clang. The flowing silver coins made a sound as they collided. Diviner Myo Sin, who had removed the manor master's top and was looking at his chest, clicked his tongue. Usually, when called for a strange phenomenon, most of the time it was unrelated. So he just had to pretend to perform some divination and pass the time. But this time was different. Bulge, bulge. Centered on the middle of the manor master's chest, black blood vessels bulged out grotesquely. At a glance, it looked like a symptom of poisoning. However, the strange thing was that the area was constantly moving. It's heading towards the heart. The bulging black blood vessels were moving towards the heart, turning the area pale. But as if blocked by something, they had not reached it yet. Diviner Myo Sin grinned. As expected of a martial artist, his vitality is strong, so the impurities haven't penetrated his heart yet. With such a strong killing intent, that thing should have already taken over. The manor master was enduring well, but even that was clearly at a critical point. Looking at the manor master's condition, he had been weakened for a long time after being afflicted by the impurities. It's 50-50. At this point, even if the impurities were purified, the chances of survival were 50-50. There was nothing more difficult than simultaneously expelling the impurities and the killing intent. But now there was no need for that. I just need to do what I was hired for. The request was not to save the manor master from the strange phenomenon. It was enough to make the manor master spit out where the seal and secret manuals were before he died. Diviner Myo Sin took out a talisman from his backpack. Myo Sin, holding the talisman, poured red ink onto the ink stone he had prepared in advance. Tap, tap. Dipping the brush in the red ink, Myo Sin began to engrave characters on the talisman. As he drew the strokes, it took the form of a ghost too. Myo Sin chanted something in a small voice. The Celestial Emperor's proclamation, bearing the heavenly strength, the malevolent spirits of the 5 directions, Why do you not perish? With a single breath from the flying immortal, 10,000 demons shall be subdued and hidden. The great sage of heavenly strength shall seize the demons' hearts. 3. Tremble, tremble, tremble. It was strange. The end of the talisman trembled on its own. Myosin attached the trembling talisman to the strange phenomenon on the Manor Master's chest, which was constantly moving towards the heart. Tap. Right at that moment, bulge, bulge, bulge. The black blood vessels began to subside, centered on where the talisman was attached. Then, Diviner Myosin formed a hand seal. Snap. Lin Chinese letter, bringing the index fingers of both hands together and tightly interlocking the rest, symbolized immovable roots. Bing Chinese letter, supporting the index fingers and spreading the interlocked middle fingers, he brought them together. At the same time, he began to chant the mantra of protecting and killing. The great general of the commanding presence of the lesser azure sky, the majestic and awe-inspiring spirit of the celestial void, the golden-armored and chained god of the 5 directions, the great commander of the thunderous fury and the vanquishing of evil. The iron chain that binds the hands and feet, the supreme controller of demons and the subjugator of malevolent spirits, the one who descends from the 9th heaven to offer protection, the one who commands the waters and opens the pathways to the 7 treasures. As he chanted the mantra of protecting and killing, the Manor Master's body convulsed. A faint vapor began to flow out from where the talisman was attached. Jai Chinese letter, he interlocked all his fingers. It symbolized external restraint. Then, the Manor Master's Adam's apple bulged out. As if his airway was blocked, the Manor Master's face turned red. Seeing that, Diviner Myosin's expression hardened. The killing intent is too strong. Myosin, who had been forming the hand seals, got up from his seat and raised his right hand, forming the Vajra Mudra on the Manor Master's Adam's apple. And he continued to chant the mantra of protecting and killing. The marshal of the vast azure sky and the vanquisher of evil, descend and be present. Subdue the malevolent spirits and demons and bring them to justice. May the divine soldiers swiftly enforce the law. Before the mantra of protecting and killing could finish creak. At that moment, the closed door to the Manor Master's room slowly opened. As a result, the 3 red threads tied to the door came loose and silver coins fell to the floor. Clang, clang, clang. Oh no, at that instant, bang. Ugh. With a strong rebound, Diviner Myosin's body was thrown backward. The force was so strong that he didn't know how far he would be thrown, but then someone grabbed his back. Thud. The startled Myosin turned his head. The one who had caught him was a boy with extremely refined and handsome features. The boy was none other than Mok Jeong-un. Myosin, who had been momentarily at a loss for words due to his strikingly good looks, was about to express his annoyance at being interrupted. I told you not to let anyone in, so how? Flinch. However, Myosin couldn't express his anger to the end. Diviner Myosin couldn't express his anger to the end. It was because he discovered Mok Jeong-un's eyes, which were as still as those of a dead person, without a single tremor. How can a living human have such eyes? A county in northwest of Anhui province, right arrow curving left, can also mean spirits, gi. Right arrow curving left, it is a passage in the Taoist scripture from Volume 2. The Supreme Secret Essentials of Assisting the Nation and Saving the People, compiled by the Perfected, a.k.a. The Supreme Secret Essentials of Assisting the Nation and Saving the People, compiled by the Perfected, of the Taishang Dongyuan Shenju Jing, or the Supreme Cavern Abyss Divine Incantation Scripture. This scripture is a part of the Taoist canon, a collection of Taoist texts compiled during the Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644 C. The Taishang Dongyuan Shenju Jing is believed to have been written during the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 C, and contains various incantations and spells used in Taoist rituals for expelling evil spirits and protecting against misfortune. Chapter 8. Strange Phenomena. 2. Mok Jeong-un's pupils, unmoving like those of a dead person. As it was the first time seeing a living person with such eyes, Diviner Myosin couldn't take his gaze off those eyes for a moment. How can a human have such go? However, he soon came to his senses at someone's voice. What? What is this? It was Guard Go-chan. Guard Go-chan, who had guided Mok Jong-un, was baffled by the sight of the Manor Master's room, filled with red threads strung with silver coins. He had found it strange that there was no one around the main building. But who was this person, and what bizarre act was he performing here? Excuse me, who are you and here? He doesn't seem to be a physician, Mok Jong-un said, looking around the room. At this, Diviner Myosin waved his hands in a hurry and said, I don't know who you are, but didn't you receive a message from Madam? This is an important moment, so please leave immediately. Madam? It's a moment that shouldn't be disturbed. It was indeed a truly important moment. In the midst of controlling the strange phenomenon invading the Manor Master's heart, the killing intent had interfered due to the interruption. In this situation, the killing intent would rather make the strange phenomenon even stronger. Please leave at once. There was no time to waste. At Myosin's urging, Guard Go-chan frowned and muttered, Could he be a diviner? Phew, that's right, I'm a diviner so quickly. What's wrong with him? At that moment, Mok Jong-un pointed to the bed with his chin and asked. Diviner Myosin turned his head. Cough, cough. There, someone was coughing with their back arched like a bow. Manor Master? Manor Master? Mok Jong-un made a puzzled expression. The condition of the Manor Master he saw for the first time was bizarrely strange. His back was arched, his chest facing upward, and his throat was moving up and down, looking quite painful. No, why's the Manor Master like that? Leave, hurry up and leave, Myosin shouted and tried to push Mok Jong-un and Go-chan out the door. Right at that moment, gulp. A loud, swallowing sound came from the Manor Master, audible to everyone. Looking at the Manor Master, his back was still arched like a bow, but the bulging of his throat that had been moving up and down disappeared. The Manor Master's expression, which had been painful, seemed to ease. But suddenly, the Manor Master, who had his eyes closed, opened them wide. Oh, Manor Master? Could it be that the Manor Master had regained consciousness? Then Myosin let out a small, rough sound. Damn it! He hurriedly took out a talisman with the character Chinese letter. Suppress, written in red from the pouch at his waist, and tried to rush towards the Manor Master, who seemed to have awakened. Then, the Manor Master's head suddenly turned to the side in a strange manner. Creak! Go-chan's eyes widened. The Manor Master's horrifying eyeballs were not just bloodshot, but dyed red except for the pupils. Amidst that, with his back arched and his head turned in such a way, it was even spine-chilling. At that moment, Diviner Myosin formed a single-handed seal with his left hand and chanted an incantation. One phoenix heads to the celestial court, one snake fears the gods, the supreme yin calls the three king, urgent and effective, obey the order. Swish. The yellow talisman wrapped around Myosin's right finger straightened out stiffly. With the talisman stretched out like this, Myosin tried to attach it to the forehead of the Manor Master, whose head had turned. However, Ka! The Manor Master let out a strange sound and shouted. Ugh! As the resounding shout echoed like a roar, Myosin staggered and was pushed back. The shout affected not only him. Go-chan also momentarily covered his ears due to the pain in his eardrums from the sudden scream. Internal energy was infused. The Manor Master was a master of internal martial arts, so his internal energy was profound. Naturally, his scream had to be infused with internal energy, and the vibrations caused pain to those who heard it. Go-chan, who had been covering his ears, looked at Mok Jong-un. But this fellow hasn't even cultivated internal energy, yet he's unaffected. Mok Jong-un was just slightly frowning. Did he simply endure the pain? In the moment of bewilderment, the Manor Master, who had shouted, turned his head and straightened his back, trying to get up from the bed. However, bang! The red threads tied to the Manor Master's wrists and ankles tightened, making him unable to stand properly and leaving him in an awkward posture. Sizzle! A faint haze and a pungent smell flowed from where the red threads were tied. Ka! The Manor Master, with his bloodshot eyes, howled like a beast, not a human. Then he pulled his right hand with all his might. At that thud, the open door was torn off and the red thread snapped. Damn it! Diviner Myo-Sin, who had been staggering due to the shout, couldn't hide his dismay. He had firmly secured the red threads, but because they had opened the door and entered, his work was ruined. Bulge, bulge, black blood vessels bulged on the Manor Master's bloodshot forehead and face. To be possessed by a strange phenomenon. This is what they call being possessed. Now that it had come to this, finding out the location of the Manor Master's seal and secret manuals, as requested by Lady Siak, was out of the question. Clang, clang, snap. Amidst the dismay, the Manor Master tried to break all the red threads strung with silver coins. Ugh! It was not a situation to question the request or anything else. Diviner Myo-Sin rushed towards the Manor Master once again, trying to attach the talisman to his forehead. However, thwack. Ugh! With a casual swing of his hand, the Manor Master sent Myo-Sin rolling on the floor. What strength? Myo-Sin was utterly perplexed. Those possessed by strange phenomena do become stronger than ordinary people, but this was incomparably different. He had no strength left to hold down the Manor Master. Snap! The red thread tying the Manor Master's left wrist was about to break. Diviner Myo-Sin shouted at Mok Jeong-un and Go Chan, "Why you two help me? Hold down the Manor Master so he can't break the threads?" Hold him down, you say. Although he couldn't understand the situation, Go Chan could tell that it was serious. There was no time to think it over in his head. Go Chan hurriedly rushed towards the Manor Master. Mok Jeong-un did the same. Is it enough to just hold him? Even if you hold him, never make eye contact, and if you feel your hands getting cold and a chill down your spine while holding him, let go no matter what. It was quite an ambiguous piece of advice to hear. Anyway, if they didn't hold down the Manor Master now, something terrible would happen. So Go Chan didn't ask any more questions and quickly grabbed the Manor Master's freed right arm. Grab. He wanted to grab the fixed left hand, but he couldn't bring himself to ask Mok Jeong-un to do it. But here, a problem arose. The Manor Master was said to be weakened, but he was a master of internal martial arts who could not be matched even by Captain Gam. The strength of such a Manor Master was too much for even Go Chan to handle. Smack. He easily shook off Go Chan's hand and instead grabbed his wrist. Huh! Snap! The grip of that hand was so strong that it felt like his wrist would break at any moment. In a panic, Go Chan instinctively tried to twist the Manor Master's wrist using the grappling hand technique. Tap. At that moment, the strength of the Manor Master's hand gripping his wrist weakened. Huh! He wondered why, but Myo-Sin had already attached the talisman to the Manor Master's forehead, and forming a hand seal, he chanted an incantation. The Northern Emperor grants me the talisman to subdue evil spirits, widely spreading the divine writing. Those who dare not obey will be imprisoned in Fengdecheng 1. Urgently act according to the order. Tremble, tremble, tremble. As the talisman was attached, the Manor Master's body convulsed. Taking this opportunity, Go Chan tried to remove the Manor Master's hand gripping his wrist, but the moment he tried to remove it, the grip strengthened again. Crack! Go Chan's wrist was twisted and broken. The bone pierced through the flesh and protruded out. Arg! A scream burst out from Go Chan's mouth. It was remarkable that he endured it despite the bone not only being broken, but also protruding out. But when the blood oozing from the pierced flesh touched the Manor Master's hand, squirm, squirm. The strange phenomenon that had bulged out in black, centered on the heart, began to move to the Manor Master's right arm with a surging momentum. Eek! As it rushed to the wrist at a tremendous speed, Go Chan was terrified. Then, Myo-Sin chanted the incantation once more with greater force. The Northern Emperor grants me the talisman to subdue evil spirits, widely spreading the divine writing. Those who dare not obey will be imprisoned in Fengdecheng. Urgently act according to the order. At that, the strange phenomenon squirmed and strongly convulsed between the wrist and the elbow, going back and forth. Guard Go Chan urged, trying to somehow remove the Manor Master's hand. Please do something? With the killing intent mixed in, the impurities have become too strong. Just endure a little. If the strange phenomenon spreads, you'll be in danger too. No, if you had said that earlier, squirm, squirm. At that moment, the strange phenomenon that had been going back and forth tried to rush to the wrist again. Gasp! The startled Go-Chan tried to twist the Manor Master's hand that wouldn't let go of his wrist using the seizing hand technique to escape. Swish! Slice! At that instant, something unexpected happened. The Manor Master's wrist, which had been holding Go-Chan's wrist, was cut off. The one who had cut off the wrist was none other than Mok Jeong-un. In Mok Jeong-un's hand was a sharp sword, one of the items hanging on the wall. Go-Chan was utterly perplexed. Although it had been perilous due to the strange phenomenon, he had never expected the Manor Master's wrist to be cut off. Diviner Myo-sin felt the same way. Cutting off the Manor Master's wrist. Just who is this guy? The Manor Master was the head of Yon Mok Sword Manor, yet there was not a moment of hesitation. Squirm, squirm. As the wrist was cut off, the strange phenomenon that had climbed up to that point tried to move back to the Manor Master's body. That's it. Another opportunity had arisen. If the strange phenomenon targeted the heart again, he could control it with talismanic techniques and somehow suppress the rampaging energy along with the killing intent. However, slice. Just as the strange phenomenon was about to pass the elbow and move towards the shoulder, Mok Jeong-un suddenly swung the sword and cut off the arm below the shoulder before the strange phenomenon could climb up. Diviner Myo-sin was so surprised that he shouted in shock, You! He wanted to say something, but he was so dumbfounded that he was at a loss for words. To him, Mok Jeong-un said nonchalantly, Isn't it better than trying to send it back through the body? Thud, thud. The black blood vessels in the severed arm of the Manor Master on the floor wriggled and thrashed about like a fish out of water. On the other hand, the color was gradually returning to the Manor Master's pale face. A county-level city in Jiangxi province. Right arrow curving left chapter 9. Strange phenomena. 3. This crazy bastard. Guard Go-Chan made a disgusted expression. Not only was it absurd to see the severed arm wriggling like a fish, but this fake Mok Jeong-un's unrestrained actions were too much to handle. No matter how dangerous the Manor Master's condition was, cutting off a warrior's right arm without hesitation was utterly fearless. What should I do about this? If Lady Siak or the other young masters found out about this, there might be trouble. Regardless of the reason, squeak. For now, Go-Chan tore his own clothes and tightly tied the arm above the severed section of the Manor Master's arm for hemostasis. Phew! Seeing the Manor Master's complexion change, Diviner Myo-sin let out a deep sigh. In fact, this method couldn't be said to be completely wrong. If the impurities become unbearable, the method of gathering them in a part of the body and amputating it is sometimes used. It's so absurd that a fellow who knows nothing about strange phenomena or impurities made such a judgment. It was enough to make one click their tongue. However, this method is literally a last resort. When dealing with such a large clan or those with power, it is difficult to handle the aftermath of such extreme measures. That was a foolish act. Diviner Myo-sin clicked his tongue and said. He wanted to say more, but now, dealing with the aftermath was the priority. Although the strange phenomenon in the Manor Master's body had been driven out by concentrating it in the severed arm, it was not yet completely resolved. Snap! Diviner Myo-sin removed the talisman with the character. Chinese letter. Suppress. That he had attached to the Manor Master's forehead and attached it to the severed arm that was wriggling and jumping on its own. Then, forming a hand seal, he chanted an incantation. The Northern Emperor grants me the talisman to subdue evil spirits, widely spreading the divine writing. Those who dare not obey will be imprisoned in Fengdecheng. Urgently act according to the order. Bulge. Bulge. Then the entire thrashing arm grotesquely bulged with black blood vessels. It was difficult to look at, unless one had a strong stomach. Even Guard Go-Chan turned his head to avoid it, but Mok Jeong-un stared at the grotesquely transformed, severed arm of the Manor Master as if it were interesting. Sizzle. The talisman trembled, and the skin it was attached to turned red. As if affected by it, the areas around the skin where the talisman was attached, which had been bulging out, began to subside. What a pity, Diviner Myosin clicked his tongue inwardly. Unlike ordinary strange phenomena, there was killing intent mixed in. Killing intent was a type of curse. In other words, it meant that it wasn't something that happened due to chance, but was intentionally inflicted. Usually, when killing intent is involved, there are ways to trace back to the culprit. However, if the strange phenomenon is concentrated in a dead piece of flesh like this, even if the killing intent is reversed, it cannot harm the culprit, let alone find out who it is. This bastard ruined everything. That was the reason for his inward sigh. He thought he should quickly perform a moderate purification, prove that it wasn't his fault, and hurry to leave this place, since he couldn't obtain what Madam wanted. Right at that moment, swish. A cold and sharp sensation was felt on the right side of his neck. Diviner Myosin, who had been chanting the incantation, suddenly stopped. What is the meaning of this? A sharp blade was pressed against his neck. The one holding the blade to his neck was none other than Mok Jeong-un. Young master? Even guard Go-chan was perplexed by Mok Jeong-un's sudden outburst. However, when Mok Jeong-un put his finger to his lips, signaling him to be quiet, he couldn't say anything more. What the hell is this guy thinking? As he was bewildered, Mok Jeong-un parted his lips. From what I see, you seem to be called a diviner. Is the Manor Master's brush with life and death related to this? See, can't you see? Your Manor Master has been consumed by a strange phenomenon. What is a strange phenomenon? At Mok Jeong-un's fundamental question, Diviner Myosin swallowed his dry saliva. He had to hurry and perform the exorcism, but he couldn't understand why he was doing this. Young master, I will explain everything, so please remove the sword. If this is not properly purified, the Manor Master's condition may worsen again. Are you sure? What? The body part has been separated, yet it can worsen again? At Mok Jeong-un's question, Diviner Myosin's eyes wavered. Usually, when such a bizarre incident occurs, people tend to trust the words of a diviner who can be considered an expert. However, this young fellow was doubting him. Diviner Myosin calmly replied, Look here, how could I lie when I'm performing divination after receiving money from Madam? At this rate, the Manor Master's life is in danger. Swish. Before he could finish his sentence, the blade slightly dug into his neck. Startled, Diviner Myosin was taken aback. What is this? Are you really determined to ruin everything? I don't know who you are, young master, but if the Manor Master dies, it could all be your fault. If the Manor Master passes away, it would be the fault of you who couldn't properly perform divination despite being paid, so how would it be my fault? Diviner Myosin was momentarily at a loss for words. Looking at this bastard, who showed no sign of wavering even when he said this, it seemed as if he had no interest in the Manor Master's life or death. Could it be that, like Madam, he's not hoping for the Manor Master to live but waiting for him to die? That possibility couldn't be ruled out either. While performing divination, he had encountered such situations countless times. The power struggle within the clan, if that's the case. Don't think too much and just answer the question. Stab. The blade dug deeper into his neck. With the fear that his neck could be cut at any moment, Diviner Myosin hurriedly said in a panic, If the young master also wishes for the Manor Master's death, I will do as you wish, so please spare my life. Also, what? Who wished for the Manor Master's death? At Mok Jeong-un's question, Diviner Myosin's expression hardened. He had taken a gamble out of fear that his neck would be cut, but it seemed he was wrong. That's? Who is it? Why, young master, I didn't mean it that way. Is it Madam? Diviner Myosin was at a loss for words. He had to make an excuse, but when he was hit right on the mark at once, he couldn't give an immediate answer. Seeing that, guard Go-chan couldn't hide his surprise. He thought the boy had gone crazy when he suddenly put a sword to the diviner's neck, but could it be that he had orchestrated this situation? Drip, drip. Then Diviner Myosin, even sweating cold sweat, opened his mouth. Young master, Madam, simply, it would be better not to roll your eyes. In a situation like this, honesty might be the way to survive. Why, young master? I think I might put more force into my hand. Swish. Eek. Madam told me to find out where the secret manuals and the Manor Master's seal are from his mouth, even if I don't have to save the Manor Master's life. In the end, Diviner Myosin spilled out what he knew. He, too, had gone through many trials and had a lot of tricks up his sleeve. But this fellow seemed like he would really cut off his head on the spot. "Secret manuals? Manor Master's seal?" Mok Jong-un asked, looking at Guard Go-chan. At this, Guard Go-chan was at a loss for what to do. Damn it, I never thought Madam would do such a bold thing. The target they were trying to switch sides to was not Madam and the eldest young master, but the second young master. But if Mok Jong-un hadn't come here, the eldest young master would have inherited the Manor Master's position before they could even make a move. Guard Go-chan. Why, yes. Madam ordered it, so what should we do? What? Guard Go-chan couldn't hide his perplexity. What did he want him to do? Even if he found out that Madam had done such a thing, there was nothing he could do about it right now. Rather, by interfering with it, he would only incur Madam's anger and vigilance. Go-chan's mind was in turmoil. Since the situation had already unfolded and they knew Madam's secret, there was only one way to improve the situation and survive. Damn it. He never thought he would say this with his own mouth. "Young master, we need to save the Manor Master's life, otherwise Madam will target you. Because I interfered, right?" "That's right." At Go-chan's answer, Diviner Myosin hurriedly intervened. "Why, young master?" "I can save the Manor Master's life. Since the strange phenomenon has been separated from his body, if we purify the severed arm, he will be safe. I will definitely save him, so please." "So you can save him?" "Yes, but I'm more curious about something else." "What is it?" "I will tell you anything. You said the strange phenomenon was threatening the Manor Master's life, so how were you going to find out what Madam ordered from the Manor Master?" At that question, Diviner Myosin was once again at a loss for words. He didn't expect to be suddenly asked about the method he was going to use to find out. He could talk about it, but this had to be heard grab. At that moment, Mok Jong-un grabbed Diviner Myosin's neck, and pressing down hard on his neck, he said, "Don't think, and when I ask, I'd like you to answer immediately without any gaps. I don't think there's a need to keep unnecessary people alive." No answer again. As expected, I was going to control the strange phenomenon and make the Manor Master speak directly. The terrified Diviner Myosin answered right away. To him, Mok Jong-un smiled brightly and said, "If you can do it, why are you thinking so hard? Please spare my life. If Madam hadn't ordered it, I would never have done such a thing. I will purify the strange phenomenon right away, so please." "No." "What?" To the puzzled Diviner Myosin, Mok Jong-un pointed to the Manor Master and said, "Try doing what you just said." What are you?" To the flustered Diviner, Mok Jong-un said with the corners of his mouth raised, "You said you can control the strange phenomenon and obtain what you want from the Manor Master's mouth, right?" At Mok Jong-un's unexpected and out-of-the-blue request, the expressions of Diviner Myosin and Guard Go-chan hardened. Chapter 10, Strange Phenomena 4. Try what you just mentioned earlier. What are you talking about? You said you could control the demon and get what you want from the Manor Master's mouth. Diviner Myosin was momentarily dumbfounded. Judging by the atmosphere, he naturally assumed they would tell him to save the Manor Master's life, but he never expected these words to spill out. Ha! Guard Go-chan was equally speechless. To avoid making an enemy of the Madam, he thought they would somehow make the Diviner save the Manor Master's life. But to think the Madam would make the same request, Go-chan approached Mok Jong-un and whispered, "Young Master, what exactly are you trying to do? You heard him, didn't you?" "What?" "We can hear what the Madam wants from the Manor Master's mouth." At those words, Guard Go-chan frowned and opened his mouth slightly. That wasn't what he was asking about. "But young master, what will you do after finding that out?" In response, Mok Jong-un let out a faint sneer. Instead, he asked back, "What will you do after finding out?" Being asked in return, Guard Go-chan was momentarily at a loss for words. The meaning of this question was simple. It meant don't comment on or question what he was doing. That crazy bastard. What the hell is he trying to do? Is he trying to intercept what the Madam was after? Troubled, Guard Go-chan tried to say something but soon closed his mouth. It wasn't like this guy would listen to his opinion anyway, but he was worried that if things got twisted, some incident might occur. Regardless of that, Mok Jong-un urged the diviner to do it. Hurry up and do it. They all right. Diviner Myo-sin hesitated for a moment, but there was no other choice. If he refused here, who knew what this bloodthirsty young master would do to him? Myo-sin took something out from a boxwood case in the corner. Smaller than a fist, it was a wooden doll. Abruptly bringing out a doll carved from wood, Mok Jong-un asked suspiciously, "What are you going to do with that?" "This wooden doll will serve as the medium." Medium. If the Manor Master directly comes into contact with the demon again like this, not only his spirit, but even his life may be endangered. This was true. Once a demon or evil spirit separates from the body, if it comes into contact again, it could lead to a dangerous situation. For a diviner who knows demons well, it was something that should never be done. "I see. I understand." Mok Jong-un's reaction was utterly indifferent. Seeing his attitude, diviner Myo-sin clicked his tongue inwardly. These people in this household don't care at all whether the Manor Master lives or dies. But if this fails, it'll be a big problem. Myo-sin looked at the severed arm of the Manor Master on the floor with tense eyes. Although the demon was suppressed by the talisman, fundamentally it was an evil born from murder, in other words, a curse. One small mistake, and not only the Manor Master, but even the diviner himself could be in danger. Damn it! Swallowing dry saliva, Myo-sin took out a talisman and stuck it to his own chest. 7 stars descending talisman. On the talisman were 3 sevens Chinese letter, then another 3 inside a boundary, and another 3 inside that. 7 stars descending talisman. This talisman offers the protection of the 7 stars. It was to prevent any curses from accidentally rebounding onto himself while performing divination techniques. SHK. He took out another talisman and wrote on it with red ink, "Great Chinese letter, passage Chinese letter." Along with mysterious symbols, those characters were written. With a tense expression, Myo-sin attached the talisman with Chinese letter written on it to the wooden doll, then wrapped red thread around its head several times. Next, he attached the Chinese letter talisman to the sleeping Manor Master's head and brought the other end of the red thread wrapped around the wooden doll to wrap around his head as well. It's connected. Finally, the 6 people roaming spirit talisman. Myo-sin took out a longer talisman than before. This was the 6 people roaming spirit talisman used for the divination technique of creating a doll and breathing a soul into it to control at will. "It may be dangerous, so please step back." At those words, Mok Jong-un and guard Go-chan moved to the end of the room. Then, Myo-sin made hand seals with his left hand and held up the talisman with his right, chanting the roaming spirit incantation. Demon puppet transformation, heaven and earth change attire, yin and yang travel, gods enter 6 times, 5 earths give birth, spirits and ghosts immeasurable, hurry as I command. At first, nothing changed. But when Myo-sin directed the hand making seals towards the Manor Master, tremble. Strangely, the Manor Master's body began to convulse. In that state, Myo-sin slowly directed the hand seals towards the wooden doll. Then, woo-woo, the characters D written on the talisman attached to the wooden doll darkened and began emitting an uncanny energy. It felt as if the wooden doll was alive. "Gives me the creeps." Watching this, guard Go-chan frowned. He had experienced all sorts of things, but matters related to demons and divination techniques were utterly unpleasant. What the hell was he trying to do? He watched nervously to see what would unfold. Tack. Diviner Myo-sin gripped the wooden doll and carefully moved it towards the arm that was consumed by the demon. Then he placed the wooden doll right in front of the arm. At that, the Manor Master's severed arm that had the suppress talisman attached began to react. Although suppressed by the talisman, the blood vessels wriggled as if about to bulge out like before. Right then, Myo-sin removed the talisman with suppress written on it. The moment he did, blood vessels hideously bulged out from the Manor Master's severed right arm and moved as if alive, gripping the wooden doll. Quack! Ugh! The instant it gripped the wooden doll, a groan escaped from the Manor Master's mouth. It was a bizarre occurrence. To think the Manor Master would react when the wooden doll was grabbed. Quack! Yug! As strength entered the hand gripping the wooden doll, the Manor Master let out an agonized groan as if in pain. Isn't this going to be a big problem? Guard Go-chan glanced at Mok Jong-un. However, Mok Jong-un was expressionlessly observing this without taking his eyes off it. It was amazing how he could remain unfazed even seeing something like this. SSS. Just then, the sinister something in the Manor Master's severed right arm flowed into the wooden doll it was gripping. Gods enter 6 times, 5 earths give birth, spirits and ghosts immeasurable. Hurry as I command. It worked. Diviner Myo-sin, who had been chanting the incantation, had a look of relief. Fortunately, the demon accepted the medium as the Manor Master. This was a kind of deception. If the demon did not accept the wooden doll as the Manor Master, it would have gone berserk and caused an incident. But luckily, the trick worked. However, crack, crack, small cracks appeared in the wooden doll that the demon had completely transferred into. Seeing this, Diviner Myo-sin's eyes wavered. The wooden doll was made of refined birch wood and was very sturdy. But for cracks to appear as soon as the demon entered, the killing intent is too strong. Myo-sin gulped down dry saliva. Although it was interrupted midway, it had possessed a body, and some of its power should have weakened during the exorcism process. But that assumption was completely off the mark. Come to think of it, it made sense. It wasn't an ordinary person, but a demon that possessed a martial artist who cultivated Kai, threatening even his life. Its level was different from typical evil spirits. It's dangerous. In an instant, Diviner Myo-sin's lips went dry. This demon with strong killing intent didn't seem like something that could be controlled. If he tried to forcefully do so here, the wooden doll might shatter, and the suppressed demon could be released. Young master, I don't think... Diviner Myo-sin couldn't finish his words. Because his eyes met Mok Jong-un's. Flinch. No matter how he thought about it, it was uncanny. How could a living human have such eyes like a dead person? Just looking at them sent shivers down his spine. SHK? Just then, Mok Jong-un was seen fiddling with a sharp blade. Seeing this, Myo-sin closed his mouth. This crazy young master probably wouldn't believe his words unless he saw it with his own eyes. No, anyone would be the same. At that moment, an ingenious idea flashed through Diviner Myo-sin's mind. He felt regretful for not thinking of this sooner, as it was practically a lifeline in this situation. Myo-sin spoke. Young master, I will control the demon, but it seems quite important, so is it all right if that person also hears it? The one Myo-sin pointed to with a nod was none other than Guard Go-chan. What? For a moment Go-chan, who wondered what he meant, understood. What they were trying to hear from the Manor Master's mouth right now was the location of the secret martial arts manual and the Manor Master's seal. So he was asking if it was okay for a subordinate to hear it as well. I will step out for a moment. Although not truly a subordinate, Go-chan thought it was better to tactfully avoid displeasing Mok Jong-un. Mok Jong-un also seemed to think the same, as he lightly nodded his head. Creak! As Go-chan obediently went out the door, Myo-sin chanted the roaming spirit incantation again. Demon puppet transformation, heaven and earth change attire, yin and yang travel, gods enter 6 times, 5 earths give birth, spirits and ghosts immeasurable, hurry as I command. Tremble, tremble. Yug. The wooden doll shook violently, and a pained groan flowed from the Manor Master's mouth. Crack! Another crack appeared in the wooden doll. It still couldn't endure it. Myo-sin knew this, but paid no heed and made the tiger hand seal with one hand, saying, Hurry as I command. Roaming spirit, answer the call. Who see calls me? A hoarse voice flowed from the Manor Master's mouth. The way the voice echoed was as if it came from the afterlife. Crack! A line cracked in the chest of the wooden doll. Watching this, beads of sweat formed on Myo-sin's forehead. Hurry as I command. Roaming spirit, answer the question. WH what? ARYUS saying? Hurry as I command. Answer where the Manor Master's secret manual and seal are located. Tremble, tremble. As soon as that question was asked, convulsions occurred in the Manor Master's head, just like the wooden doll. Shaking violently, his eyelids moved uncontrollably. Crack, crack. Along with that, cracks appeared in the eyes and neck of the wooden doll. It seemed like it would shatter at any moment. Right then, the Manor Master opened his mouth. Medicinal hall, underground, Chinese letter, Jiang, stone door inside. Medicinal hall, underground, Chinese letter, Jiang, stone door. That was clearly what he heard. He was about to continue saying something. Quagic. At that moment, the wooden doll crumpled and shattered into a grotesque shape. Then the turbulent, eerie something tried to flow along the red thread towards the connected Manor Master. Myosin hastily shouted, "Young Master, you must cut the thread." Thread. He immediately realized something had gone wrong when the wooden doll shattered. Mok Jong-un hurriedly swung his sword down towards the thread along which the turbulent something flowed. Snip! The turbulent, eerie something lost its way as the thread was exquisitely cut. Did it work? Just as he thought it was blocked, woo-oh, the turbulent something rapidly climbed up the sword with tremendous speed. Realizing this, Mok Jong-un tried to let go of the sword hilt. But unlike the red thread that was tied in a long, complex maze, the length of the sword was woefully short. Pack, a chilling sensation flowed in through his hand. That sensation rapidly penetrated into his body through his arm. Mok Jong-un's body shook as if struck by lightning. It worked. Seeing this, the corners of Diviner Myosin's mouth curled up. It went as intended. The wooden doll couldn't endure that killing, intent-filled demon from the start. So he had predicted that it would eventually be released from the suppression during the 6-people roaming spirit technique. Thus, Myosin deliberately made the demon transfer to Mok Jong-un, and it succeeded. Pack, Diviner Myosin took out a talisman with suppress written on it from his bosom and attached it to the convulsing Mok Jong-un's forehead. Killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The Manor Master's mouth roughly revealed the location of the secret manual and seal. And he even passed the demon to this bastard. Demons also have a will, so they learn. Since it experienced the exorcism technique and even endured the 6-people roaming spirit technique, there was no longer any way to remove the demon through divination techniques. It's unfortunate, but it happened because you pressured me. If the demon was forcibly removed, the possessed person could lose their life or become disabled. But either way, it didn't matter. As long as he completed the madam's request, that was enough for him. The scene before his eyes turned white. Jiang looked around. The sound of water trickling and birds chirping could be heard simultaneously. This spring, which gave a refreshing feeling, was the place he always went to fetch water with every morning. What is it? It felt like something had happened just before, but he couldn't remember what it was. It seemed like he had a momentary dream or had spaced out for a bit. It's bothering me. It felt like he was forgetting something, but he couldn't recall it. After pondering while sitting on a rock, Jiang eventually stood up. Then he shouldered the water frame he had put down. I need to hurry. If he's late, his grandfather will nag him. Jiang ran up the steep mountain path with the water frame on his back. This mountain path he ran on every day was so familiar he could traverse it with his eyes closed. Splash, splash. The water in the water containers hanging on the frame sloshed. Nevertheless, not a single drop of water spilled out. Following his grandfather's nagging to never let the water overflow, at some point he became able to carry it without spilling a single drop. Like that, Jiang ran. After running for a while as he was about to reach the mountain top, Jiang frowned. Black smoke was visible there. The place where the smoke was rising from was where his house was located. Seeing this, Jiang threw down the water frame and ran like crazy towards that place. Soon he arrived there. Crackle, crackle, the scorching heat reached him. The house was burning fiercely. Jiang's face stiffened terribly. Hurriedly looking around, Jiang ran to the back of the burning house. There was a small vegetable garden in the backyard. It was because medicinal herbs that could be cultivated were grown directly. Usually, his grandfather would wake up early in the morning and pick herbs from the garden. Please, please, Jiang, who ran to the garden, stopped in his tracks. Through his eyes that widened as if about to burst, he saw something stained with blood. Things that should have been inside the body were strewn across the vegetable garden. Grit. Jiang gritted his teeth, and he followed the trail of blood and pieces. Looking down the hill, Jiang shouted, "Grandfather!" His grandfather was there. The sight of his grandfather, with only his upper body remaining, the lower half torn away, was utterly horrible. Even in that state, his grandfather's face could be seen, barely clinging to life, struggling to lift his head. The moment he saw that, it felt like his sanity would fly away. Someone was standing next to him. It was a being with black eyes devoid of whites and a pale face. Jiang could not recognize him at all. "Is that what you desire most?" Jiang's pain could be felt. The black-eyed being who was looking at him like that snapped his fingers. Tack. At that moment, a bizarre thing happened. Jiang, who had been enraged, couldn't hide his bewilderment. What is this? The image of his grandfather at the bottom of the hill disappeared without a trace. Turning his head, wondering where he had disappeared to, the house that had been burning was standing there as usual, as if nothing had happened. Moreover, the vegetable garden that had been a mess was intact. In that garden, his grandfather could be seen picking herbs while rubbing his back. "Grandfather?" Then his grandfather turned his head and said, "If you're here, why are you just standing there blankly instead of helping?" The moment he heard his grandfather's voice like that, his heart swelled with emotion. He didn't know what had happened just now, but he realized how precious his grandfather was. He would never lose his grandfather again, because he was the only reason he, who should have died, was able to live on. Someone with black eyes was watching Jiang from behind like this. He couldn't hide his satisfaction. Yes, stay with your grandfather forever. Never lose what's precious to you again right then. Jiang, who had been trembling with overwhelming emotion, suddenly whipped his head around. The black-eyed being frowned. Jiang was staring straight at him with baleful eyes like a dead person. That shouldn't have been possible. That bastard absolutely couldn't recognize him. Puck! At that moment, Jiang's 2 fingers dug into the black eyes. Eorg! Jiang's fingers gouged and plucked out his eyeballs. The black-eyed being, whose eyes were abruptly torn out, writhed in agony. To him, Jiang spoke in a chilling voice. "I don't know what you are, but you're quite annoying. To play tricks using my deceased grandfather.